Bricker, and she left Houston at 7 o'clock this morning. She is on the ground in Lubbock, Texas right now because there's fog over Austin, so we can't get into Austin. So she's going to be diverted, it looks like, to El Paso next, and catch another flight from El Paso back to Austin. So I'll be surprised if Ms. Bricker gets to join us. I hope that she does at some point, but I just visited with her on the phone, and she expressed her apologies, but there's not much she could do about it. I apologize for my tardiness. I flew from Tyler. I left at 7, and I've been circling for an hour over Austin. I had to land in Georgetown to get in, so please accept my apologies for the tardiness. So I think we'll go ahead and start and hope that Ms. Bricker can join us at some point. So again, I'm going to sit in for Ms. Bricker and her position as chair of strategic and planning, because this is a joint meeting today of participation and success, as well as the strategic planning committee, which I chair. And so I'm going to chair it until Ms. Bricker gets here, and then I will turn it over to her, hopefully. I'd also like to recognize Representative Morrison in the audience today. Thanks so much for being here. We really do appreciate you being here. I will say the reason we called a joint meeting today is most of the topics, the HEIA discussion, the Uniform GPA, are within the scope of the Participation and Success Committee. The incentive funding conversation is a strategic planning, but also because the HEI recommendations will be going through, obviously, the legislative process, we thought it a good idea to bring as many of our board members in on both of these topics, that being GPA and also the HEI recommendations, to make sure that we get full comments from everybody here today. So that's the reason for having a joint meeting. The first agenda item is to discuss and possibly consider some of the recommendations which we discussed at a prior board meeting, which was the follow-up to the analysis of the feasibility study for restructuring the state financial student aid programs in Texas. And the staff has made recommendations to the board for us to consider today and adopt for these recommendations, except for the need plus merit recommendation. I think that Dan Weaver is going to provide us with some information on needs plus merit, but we've called a special meeting on November 13th, where we hope to then fully explore the needs plus merit consideration. But we will, I think, get some information, at least for initial consideration. But there are numerous recommendations within the body of this report, which we will be asked to look at today. All of the board members have been provided with a list of those recommendations, and we've had presentations on them. And what I would propose that we do today is that the staff present only those where the staff recommendations differ from those found in the report. And however, we've all been given a copy of the recommendations in our folder. If any of us have questions, I encourage us to go back and ask those. The thought being, let's try to get as many of these recommendations off the table and approved today, and then the focus to be on the needs plus merit when we come back on November 13th. So I'm going to ask Lois Hollis to come up, and who has been working on this. She is Senior Assistant to the Deputy Commissioner for Business Finance, and also Dan Weaver, who's Assistant Commissioner for Business and Support Services, to come up and make a presentation.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, well, what I'm going to do is exactly what Whit said, and that is just go through the recommendations where the staff recommendation is different from HEIA's recommendation, and then I'm glad to answer any questions that you guys have on these or any of the other recommendations. In just a second for the slides to come up. And you've got a handout, and I was prepared to go either way. And so if you flip to page 3, has HEIA's recommendations, staff recommendation, do not adopt as the first slide. We're almost there. getting closer. Okay, and we'll work from the handout while we get this. Oh, wait. Okay. So, for the first three recommendations I'm going to talk about, these are recommendations that staff suggests you do not adopt. Recommendation 5 and 10 deal with whether or not we should open additional pathways for non-traditional students to participate in the Texas Grant Program. And this suggestion was brought up if we merge Texas Grant, TEOG, which is the Program for Community College Students, and the TEG program. We are not recommending merging those programs, so really there's no need to pass these two recommendations in our view. Next one is align the criteria for Texas Grant with the satisfactory academic progress requirements for federal financial aid. The satisfactory academic progress requirements for federal financial aid are lower than those for Texas Grant. And we brought this to the board 4 years ago. We looked at this, and the board said, you know, we don't think a 2.5 GPA is too much for students to complete, and we just don't think we can lower standards for students. And at that time, they said, let's keep them where they are, and staff agrees, and that's our position again. Forget I'm driving. Okay. Recommendations 2 and 3 deal with merging and aligning programs, and these are recommendations where we agree but with some modifications. We agree that the program should be aligned, and we agree that TEG and the Texas Grant Program should be aligned, but we don't think TEOG should be part of that. TEOG is for community college students, and community colleges have a different group of students and a different mission than universities, so we would suggest taking TEOG out of that recommendation. What the consultant said was we need to develop a long-range plan for aligning these. So they didn't say, you know, do it now. They said look at it, find out the best way to align the criteria and the allocation process, and then implement something. So what we propose is, you know, looking at this, working with the schools, working with ICUT, and finding out what the best way we can align the two major state grant programs so that the students benefit and the state benefits.
Lois, can I ask
Please.
a quick question? I was looking back to my notes, and I think my question there was if you could provide us with a little bit more clarification as to what the consultants were thinking about in terms of the alignment and merging. I know you're saying to leave TEOG out, but still TEG and Texas Grant.
Right. And part of that goes back to one of the recommendations that we said adopt, and that is looking at students in different income quintiles, where we said, you know, we agreed with the consultants that we should fund students from the 3 lowest income quintiles. Right now, I think 94% of the students who receive a Texas Grant are in the 3 lowest income quintiles, and 75% of the TEG recipients are in those quintiles. So we really need to focus on our neediest students first, and that's part of this alignment process too. And one thing I want to mention, when we're talking about income quintiles, we're doing that in kind of a broad way because the real measure that we look at is what's called expected family contribution. We've kind of talked about that in the past. And where that comes into play is, say you've got a family of 4 with an income of $62,000, and you've got one child in college. Well, their expected family contribution is going to be different than, say, a single person who's going back to college who had a $62,000 income. That person would have a much higher EFC, and you wouldn't want to give them money at the expense of somebody with a family of 4 at that same income. So this idea is that we align these for the lowest income students. And also that when you look at the need plus merit, that the merit criteria would apply to the TEG program as well. Yeah.
Just to follow up on Whit's question, could you elaborate why staff is recommending that we align TEG and Texas Grant but not merge? Why not?
We don't know if you get any benefit from merging. The program's purposes have been two different purposes. The purpose of TEG was to kind of take the burden off of public institutions so that students could attend private institutions, and that's really the reason that we're looking at. And Texas Grant is just for students at public institutions. There's more money in Texas Grant, and I think keeping the funding streams separate would be beneficial.
I guess my question is, I mean, you through fund accounting, you can keep funding streams separate and still
Exactly.
make the program more understood in the marketplace, so to speak. And so my main concern here is simplicity and understanding in the parent-student population.
Right. Well, and then the other thing is, when we're looking at that's something else to look at, that we will look at as we look at whether or not it's a good idea. The TEG program right now has a pathway in for non-traditional students and graduate students. Texas Grant does not. And so one of our recommendations was, since we weren't recommending merging the programs, we weren't going to look at the pathway in for the non-traditional students. So that brings up another question.
I think we'll also have the opportunity, I failed to mention that after the staff presentation, we are going to have the opportunity to hear several people in the audience. And one of those I know is, I think Carol's here somewhere.
She is.
Hi, Carol. And I think Carol can maybe help speak to that also for us as we discuss that. So.
Any other questions on that? Okay. The last recommendation is recommendation 15, and on page 5 of your blue pages, there's a chart that talks about this, and that may help. This is collapsing some of the small programs into two different programs, a workforce shortage program, and then an early awareness, early commitment program. And we recommend doing this, but taking out two of the programs that the consultants recommended. They recommended that we include college work study, and we really think, because of the positive effects that college work study has on students, that this not be included. And also the board asked for more money in the LAR for this program. We think it's important not to put that in here. And then there's the fifth-year accounting program, which is a scholarship program that's funded by licensure fees from CPAs, and we didn't think it was right to take those licensure fees and put it in with this. On your blue page, we still had the fifth-year accounting program included. We've since talked about that as staff and think that really needs to come out. So the two programs we're talking about are something like Indiana's 21st Century Scholars Program, where you would start with 8th graders, and you would say, okay, if you have financial need, you graduate with a recommended curriculum, you have a 3.0, we're going to make sure that you have your tuition and fees covered for 4 years. And we've worked with the students and their families and try and help them through the pipeline. Indiana's had great success with this, and we think it's a great thing to start as a pilot program. We would probably start with the House Bill 400 schools because there's already an infrastructure there for working with the students and their families. The second would be a workforce development program or workforce shortage program, and could either be an add-on to Texas Grant, where you say if you're a junior, senior in a workforce shortage field, we'll give you a Texas Grant Plus, or we could do a loan repayment program where we say if you graduate and work in this field and stay in Texas, we'll repay your student loan. So we could do either of those two things with the money.
How do we accomplish that when in certain cases there aren't enough funds to go out to Texas Grants as it is today?
You would just, for the students in Texas Grant, what you would say is it's important to us that you major in engineering, in math or science, and you teach. And it's important enough for us to put extra money for those students who are getting Texas Grants.
Where does the money come from?
The money comes from, and that's a good question, a lot of the money comes from the Foundation School Fund, from the Early High School Graduation Program, the Educational Aid Program, and the TANF Program. and those are what's called general revenue dedicated funds. So it will take legislation to earmark those funds for something else. But it would be administratively, it would help. And I'm not sure, we're running numbers now, I'm not sure some of those programs actually help us get closer to the goals of closing the gap. And the idea is to help us reach those goals. Any other questions about those or even any of the other recommendations?
Lois, why don't you go back to the first slide and just very quickly run through the ones where y'all are recommending that we adopt the recommendation from the consultant. And I also want to say this is that I'm remiss is that Vice Chairman of Participation Success here, Dr. Lynn Phillips, and I've offered her the chair to chair this, and she has said that she'd like me to continue on, but I will appreciate her assistance all the way through this. So.
Okay, great. We've kind of gone through some of these. Some of these are policy issues, and the first one is maintain the Texas Grant Program as a cornerstone program. Texas Grant has done what it was supposed to do, gotten kids to take the recommended curriculum. Those kids succeed at higher rates than other kids with financial aid who don't have the Texas Grant Program. Recommendation 4, and I kind of touched on that, is target students in the lowest 3 income quintiles. We think that that's a good idea. Keep the TPEG set-aside funds at the institution. These are funds that the institutions collect from tuition set-asides as a percentage of what the students pay in tuition, and those programs go mainly, or more than 50% of those funds go to non-traditional students and other students who don't qualify for Texas Grant. We think it's important to leave that program at the institution because it gives them flexibility to deal with their own student population. Recommendation 7 is maintain the Be On Time program as an incentive program. It was originally started for middle and upper middle income students, and we think it's a great program for those students and to give them incentive to graduate on time. And the board's already kind of done that with where you placed it in the LAR. Recommendation 12 is to increase student and family awareness of college costs. Something we'll let you know about is that we are designing a financial aid estimator, and we hope to have that up and running the end of this month to the middle of next month. So that's where families can go out, answer 8 or 9 questions, and based on the institution they're going to, look at what a typical financial aid package would be for somebody in their situation. So we're very excited about that. Recommendation 14 is using the national average for tuition and fee increases when we calculate the Texas Grant amount. We have to calculate the new Texas Grant amount by January 15th, 31st of every year. And we do it prospectively, so we ask institutions to project what their tuition and fees are going to be. A lot of institutions aren't comfortable doing it that early, and this just gives us a mechanism to use for us to go ahead and make those projections. Okay. Recommendation 16 is develop an accountability system for financial aid programs. We currently have performance measures, but we realize we probably need to take a look at those and make sure that the outcomes that we're measuring are the outcomes that we should be measuring and that are getting us closer to the goals of closing the gaps. Recommendation
Excuse me a question. When we look at the accountability system, do we have any mechanism in place where we can see if the money is actually spent the way we hope it will be? In other words, does the money go to the student, and then do we know how
what happens to the student?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
What happens to the money? What happens to the money? Is that what you said?
Right.
I mean, the only thing we know is that they use it for educational costs. We can look at, what we do look at are persistence rates and graduation rates. But beyond that, I'm not sure. Do you have a suggestion?
No, I just was surprised to find when we went to Lee High School in Houston that one of their concerns was how their students used the funds, and I really had always thought the funds went from were granted and went to someplace in the university and were applied to things.
Well, and actually that for students who owe money to the university and they're getting a Texas grant, they will apply those first to tuition and fees. If other funds have been applied, then they give the student that money to use for other educational costs, living, book supplies, or the board. Okay, recommendation 9 is adding a merit incentive of a one-time $1,000 Texas grant for students who complete the Distinguished Achievement Program. And this is really kind of starting a way to incentivize students to reach a higher goal. Recommendation 13 is maintaining a decentralized approach to administering the Texas Grant and the TEG program. The difference between a centralized system and a decentralized system, which is what we have as a decentralized system, is in a centralized financial aid system, the state would actually be making the financial aid awards directly to the students. It's very labor intensive and it's very costly to set up. However, we can, through aligning programs and coming up with different criteria, more closely mimic that kind of system than we do now. Luckily, we have Lee Holcomb around to help analyze some data. We're now collecting data from the FAFSA, and we've got enrollment data, so we can do some analysis to find out how we could better allocate funds and actually target students. Part of this recommendation also includes having a statewide deadline for completing the FAFSA, and we recommend this only for the Texas Grant Program, not the TEOG program, because students at community colleges, a lot of them don't even decide to enroll until school started, and we don't want to disenfranchise those students. But we think a statewide priority deadline for Texas Grant would really help the state get across its message that you've got to fill out the FAFSA to be eligible for financial aid. The last two parts of that recommendation deal exclusively with the Texas Grant Program. If we incorporate a statewide deadline, then that would apply to returning students for Texas Grant as well. So they would have to apply by the priority deadline to get first shot at Texas Grant funds. And the last part of that is we should cap the Texas Grant Program at no more than the cost of tuition and fees for students. Currently, students attending an institution who charges less than the statewide average for tuition and fees, currently those students can use those funds to pay for books, supplies, and other educational costs, but it's at the expense of making additional awards in the Texas Grant Program. So if we limited that, that would free up more money. Now, the other part of that is those students who are attending those institutions who are receiving a Pell Grant have that Pell Grant to help them pay for other educational costs. At a higher cost institution, the institutions are allowed to use the Pell Grant to help cover part of the tuition and fee charges that are over the state average. And so our recommendation is that for those institutions that charge more than the average, don't let them use the Pell Grant to fill in that gap. Make them use institutional funds or other grant funds for that, so that those students have more equity. Okay, and that's the end of the adopt recommendations.
Well, do we know, one of the key recommendations is serving the lowest 3 quintiles.
Right.
Okay. Do we know between the programs we administer now and at current levels of funding and the institutionally administered programs, what percentage of that lowest 60% do we currently serve?
We can find that out. We've got the data, and we can look and see for the other programs. For Texas Grant, we serve 94%. Well, you mean out of the eligible population?
I'm talking about the eligible population, not how many in the program, what percentage in the program are from the low 3 quintiles,
but how many?
Rather, of the potential students in the low 3 quintiles, how many are we serving?
We'll talk a little bit about that.
Dan will have some of that information. Do you have it for 2008? We can run it for 2000 and once we get the data in for 2008, we can run it, but we can run it for 2007 and look and see what that number is.
And if we can, please take into account the institutional-based aid programs.
Yeah, and
so we look at the whole universe.
Now, the issue with, like, the TPEG program, the criteria for that is that you have financial need. So that's a wide open, when you look at the amount of money available and the number of students with financial need, you're going to need billions more to cover that.
I just think we need to know, have a good handle on where we are today. And I know it's a moving target. Texas A&M this fall has started a program whereby any student from a family with less than $60,000 in income is eligible for financial aid. So
yeah, we can get you an idea.
What the institutions are doing as well.
Any other questions? Okay, well, for the fun part, I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
First, let me say thank you for having the opportunity to come and talk to you. I do want to make a couple of opening remarks. Our institutions, we made them jump through a lot of hoops at the beginning of the semester in August and September to collect the data that I'm going to go through with you today. It was not without its pain and suffering, and I just wanted to make on the record how much we appreciated all of the institutions for their response. Community colleges, four-year universities, independent colleges. We had about a 95% or greater than 95% response rate, which we thought was fantastic. So we're very pleased with the data set that we were able to collect. I've presented a few times before this committee and other committees. I usually like to start with a nice story. However, I'm going to forego that today because of the time constraints.
Sam, pull your mic a little closer. Do you want us to beg for it or what?
So my only story is that we had...
that was easy.
I'm just kidding. So the presentation is really built around three different components. The first component is looking at the data that we collected and just give a broad stroke view of what that data looks like, and I'll talk through that. The second part is really looking at merit criteria and what kind of impact that would have on enrollment or eligibility, and then we looked at merit component and how it would affect a success measure, and we'll talk about that. So there's really three components. I don't want to labor too long on some areas because the fun stuff is at the end, but if you have questions, please feel free to stop me, and I'll talk as long as you want me to go. Okay. The first slide is looking at the specific cohort data that we received, and the cohorts we looked at were fiscal year 2003 and fiscal year 2004. So we took a population of needy students from the financial aid database. We provided that information to the institutions. The institutions responded back to us with SAT, ACT scores if they had them, class rank information if they had them. We collected all this information. This is a characterization of those two particular cohorts. There's a couple of unique characteristics of these two cohorts I want to point out. The fiscal year 03 cohort was really the last year that we considered Texas Grant as being fully funded. The fiscal year 04 cohort was the next year, which was not fully funded. The red circle on the table is the number of eligible students, which is eligibility at that time was recommended high school program and have need, and then the number of awards that were made. So we had 20,414 eligible students. From those 20,414, we made 8,850 awards. for about 43% of the eligible population in public 4 years. So all of the data is here. We're going to focus very specifically on cohort fiscal year 2004 because it most closely resembles the current cohorts. We're at about similar types of funding levels. So we will be able to today a little bit and more in the future as we're looking at this data analysis of projecting performance and behaviors of this particular cohort with the fiscal year 08 group, which is our current group. So we have a nice comparison. We've got oodles of data because we have 80,000 students with SATs and class rank information. Yes.
Dan, you're talking about those being eligible. Do you break it out for the new participants and then those that are also renewing?
These are for just initial awards. So this is the entering class.
Entering class, those 03 and 04.
Yes.
Brand new students.
Brand new students.
Okay.
These are all recommended high school program or better, and they all have need of at least $1. Okay.
How do you define the need part?
Need is cost of attendance minus expected family contribution.
Okay,
So if my family contribution is, if my cost of attendance is $15,000 and my need or my expected family contribution is $14,999,
yeah.
I have a $1 need.
And this is where we got by starting with the neediest, the ones who needed the most, and going up till we ran out of money.
We'll go through those slides.
Oh, okay.
Those are coming.
All right.
I also want to make just a real quick comment. This is 2020 hindsight, looking back 4 years ago. So we have perfect vision of what happened,
Right.
not necessarily of what was happening at the time.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind. The next slide is the...
Dan, can I ask one question? I know we're going to wait this out. I'm just... One number that kind of sticks out to me, the public 2-year, that number surprises me that we have that many Texas grant recipients in public 2-year. I mean, we can come back to that. I know that we're a lot lower than that on TEOG, in terms of what we fund, and so that number surprises me a little bit, but
So the ethnic breakdown of this 2004 cohort, and I'll stop saying that because I don't want to be completely repetitive, but the left-hand bar chart are the population of eligible students. The second bar is the Texas grant recipients, and the third bar is those that did not receive the Texas grant. So of this population of 20,414, the middle column are the 8,850 that received a grant, and the ones on the right are the ones that did not receive the grant. And I'll power through these fairly quickly if that's all right. The next table is the same population of eligible students by income quintile. The bottom blue part is the first quintile, so that's the lowest income quintile, which is less than $22,000 family income. The red bar is second income quintile, which is less than $30,299. The third income quintile is the green, I guess that's good, which is $61,684. So as Lois mentioned before, the Texas grant recipients are primarily in those first three income quintiles.
So graphically, it looks clear that half of those in the lower three quintiles that are eligible did not receive grants in this year.
That's correct. Again, this is the just data regurgitation of this is just what happened. The next slide is our ESP category.
Dan,
Yes.
I have a question. If campuses are in fact allocating on a need basis and they start with the lowest income students first, or the students with the lowest family contribution first, why wouldn't you have a larger concentration of students that received a Texas grant in the lowest income quintile?
I guess there's two parts in Lois. I always let Lois kick me under the table when I say something wrong. But there's an EFC cutoff in 2004 of $8,500, and most institutions are operating on essentially a first-come, first-served basis. So if I'm a needy student, I meet Texas grant eligibility requirements, and I'm there, I make the award, and I make that award until I run out of money.
And let me just add a point of clarification. What institutions do is they have a priority deadline, like we're proposing for Texas Grant. And they say, okay, everybody who applies by that priority date, we're going to look at you and we're going to award you, but we're going to start with the 0 EFC students and work your way up. Part of what you're seeing is which students apply by that deadline. The other is what happens with EFC. If you've got a family of 10 making $100,000 and you've got 5 in college, well, that family is going to have a very low EFC, but their income is higher. So you're going to have some of those people in the higher income groups, and it's just a matter of the way the EFC process works. It kind of equalizes things for students. So you'll always have some of those higher income students there.
So what I'm hearing is it fair to characterize that more second and third quintile students are applying faster, getting in line first than the lowest quintile students? Is that what you're telling us?
That could be part of it. We don't know exactly what the issue is, but yeah, I think that probably is.
The next slide actually goes into specifics on EFC categories, because that's how we do make awards. Income quintiles are nice to talk about and know because they're relative to what's going on in the rest of the country. We base awards on expected family contribution. So the next slide is to break out by expected family contribution. Excuse me. The first are the 0 EFCs, the blue line, the blue box. Then less than 4,000, less than 8,500. And you can see in the middle the Texas grant recipients, just about all of them fall into those first 3 EFC breakouts. And again, I kind of caution because we're looking backwards and we can see perfectly what happened. There's going to be a little bit of fuzziness in some of the numbers. So I don't get particularly worked up about the 81 students that are above 8,500. That's what the 81 hanging out there is. So that's a real very quick snapshot of the population of students in that particular cohort that got a grant versus didn't get a grant. Ethnicity, income levels, EFCs. The beauty of this particular cohort, and I apologize, this is good stuff. The beauty of this particular cohort is I have a lot of students that didn't get a grant, and I had a lot of students that got a grant. So now we're going to move into, well, what happened to these students based on did they get a grant or did they not get a grant? And what happened to these students if they were going to meet some merit criteria that the coordinating board would want to propose? So the next slide are 2 particular merit considerations that we apply to this particular group. The first one is the consultant's criteria, which is an OR criteria. So you had to graduate distinguished program, or you had to have an SAT score of a 930 on a 1600 scale, or you had to be in the top 50% of your class. The second criteria we call the alternate merit component. We've also imposed a $10,000 EFC limit on that to further push the funds down into these lowest income quintiles. It's distinguished or IB on the curriculum, and this is you have to have 2 of the 4 criteria. The SAT score is 1070 on a 1600 scale, which is considered to be the college readiness score.
For the state.
For the state.
Yeah, and that translates into a 1605 on the new SAT.
So what was the rationale behind why the consultants would recommend a lower score?
I think their perspective in July when they presented was present a low hurdle to get into the program, and I think a high hurdle to stay in the program, correct? I think the rationale was low hurdle, high hurdle. So low hurdle is what the recommendation was. And the numbers, when we go through the next couple of slides, will show you how low of a hurdle that is.
Was the low hurdle recommendation based on national averages, or was this something based on just their recommendation and findings?
It was based on, what they did was they looked at, SAT scores and other issues, and they wanted to find
that
something.
Was that on a national basis?
Yeah, it was done on a national basis, and then they did a quick and dirty of a sample of schools too to see what the outcome would be. But what they found was this was a bit of a stretch for some students, and it didn't really disproportionately affect minority students, and so that was their rationale for their recommendation. They wanted it to be more of a stretch than what students currently had, but they didn't want it to be too much of a stretch.
Dan, also, I just following up on Wingo's question, it's been a while since I've read the full report, but I thought that their follow-up hurdle, correct me if I'm wrong, they were aligning that with the Pell Grant. Is that?
Right. Yes, it was. It was.
I think it was lower than what our hurdle is for renewals.
Yeah.
I think
right.
Bob, both of their hurdles were lower. I think it was lower to get into the program and then lower to continue in the program.
Right. And part of their reasoning was, once you get into the program, if you graduate, as long as you graduate, that's what they were going for. Just graduate and get through.
I guess I'd like to stay on this slide for just a second. The class rank figure is top 1/3 of the class, and then the GPA requirement for the alternate merit is 3.0 based on the standardized GPA, which you'll be taking into consideration later today. Fundamentally, when you look at that and you say top 1/3 of the class, my perspective is that I can take all of the high school graduates and multiply 1/3 of them, and if they have need, they're going to be in this population that is going to meet one of these particular criteria. So we're talking about a large number of students. And 3.0 GPA, and I don't want to talk about GPA, so it doesn't seem to be an onerous requirement on students to be in the top 1/3 of their class and to maintain a 3.0 GPA. So keep that in mind. The next couple of slides are going to talk through the income quintile effects of these two different merit criteria.
I have one quick question, and maybe this is just for clarification purposes. When we look at the top 1/3 of a class and a 3-point GPA, do those two numbers correlate in direct proportion, or if you're maintaining a B average, is that really putting you above percentage-wise that top 1/3?
Because there is not a standardized GPA for the state. This is the future of where we're trying to go, and I guess I don't feel like I'm qualified to answer that specific question. We can look at it.
Okay.
And actually, Dan says that, but with the range of GPAs that we have, going from 120 points to 3 points to try and find out which each high school does, you've heard the issues. I'm not sure how we do that, because there's no common GPA for us to look at, no standard for us to convert from. I guess we could do a sampling, probably.
I guess for this particular study, because we don't have a standardized GPA, what we did was we assumed that everybody was going to have a 3.0 GPA. So we took that criteria and found everybody's going to have an opportunity to meet that criteria. So the other ones were, I only had to meet one of the other criteria.
One more question about the criteria. The ESC of less than 10,000 for the alternate criteria, was that arrived at as an estimate of what would catch the lower 3 quintiles, or because that's how you were selected?
We used less than 10,000 in our LAR request for our exceptional items, so we were trying to be consistent with what our appropriations request was.
But you actually use that as a selection criteria, and then once you sampled, we see what they fall into quintile-wise.
Correct. So the next slide are needy students meet alternate merit criteria across the lowest income quintiles. So harken back to our 20,414 students. This is that same population of 20,414. The blue bar on the bottom are those students that would have fallen out because they didn't meet the consultant's merit criteria. The red bar are the students that fell out because they did not meet the alternate merit criteria. And the green bars on the top are students that met the alternate merit criteria. And the total of the green bars is about 13,203.
What's the total of the red bars? So I can tell what your brain says.
13,552. But don't quote me on that. I have that written down somewhere.
I'll check you later.
So the total of the green bars is still way higher than the total number of grant recipients.
Yes, ma'am. I guess one of the striking things about this particular chart is it's every income quintile. So the lowest income quintile has high achieving students. The next chart is that same criteria based on ethnic breakdown. So the left-hand bar are white students. The second bar are African American students, Hispanic students, Asian students, and then the other category, which is a couple of other different groups. So this is that 13,203 total broken down by ethnicity as opposed to income quintile.
This is an important slide because it shows that the poor kids not only can but are achieving at very high levels.
So the next slide is the money is the money slide. I blew my line. The next slide is the money slide. So we took this population, now we've got them segregated out into high achieving, meeting merit criteria, and now we had an opportunity to look at this population and did they get a Texas grant and did they not get a Texas grant. So this is the first income quintile. What we did was we looked at a success measure, and what we measured was did they achieve some kind of a success in a 4-year period, a diploma, a certificate, some kind of success measure, or are they persisting? So it's a combination of I've either already had success, I've graduated, I've had some other kind of an event happen, or I'm still persisting in higher ed. Okay, so that's the criteria that we looked at. So we compared then the alternate merit students that received a Texas grant with the students that also received a Texas grant that did not have the merit criteria. And we compare on ethnicity in this particular case. And I'm apologize for cramming all these numbers into the slides. I wanted to make sure that you had all the raw numbers so that you could take this information home with you and run your own calculations if you'd like to. This is the first income quintile. The second income quintile looks very much like this. What I did was calculate the differential between the ethnic groups on the left-hand side with the right-hand side and said, all right, I'm getting what kind of bang for my buck am I getting with Texas Grant? And for the most part, across the board, on the first income quintile, it's about a 25% differential between this success measure. So a huge difference. The second income quintiles are slightly less than this. And as you move further up into the income quintiles, the gap starts shrinking. So the biggest impact that we have in Texas Grant for high achieving students is at the lowest income quintile.
Say that again.
The biggest impact, I hope I can say it again, the biggest impact we have for Texas Grant is in the lowest income quintile for students that met the alternate merit criteria.
And when you say impact, you mean impact on percentage success?
Success, which is some component of success or persistence.
This is 2008 sampling of the 2004 cohort?
Correct. So this is the most recent data we have on this particular cohort.
What percentage of that cohort were you able to, because obviously this is not all 20,000 students. 13,000 recipients.
Well, this is the first income quintile. Essentially,
this is 100% of the first income quintile?
Yes.
That's what I'm... So it's the 2262?
Let me do a quick...
Okay.
39.
The left hand would be the percentages on the 2677.
This is a partial, because these are essentially we end up with groups that had high merit and either got a Texas Grant or didn't, or they did not have merit and got a Texas Grant or didn't. So there's four populations here. There's four populations, period. These are two of the four populations. What's not on here are the students that did not. Students that met the alternate merit criteria and did not get a Texas Grant. And then students that did not meet the alternate merit criteria and did not get a Texas Grant. So those are the four groups. Did I confuse everybody?
Only slightly.
Only slightly, yeah.
Dan, could we also, one thing I think that I'd like to see is this same data, but by quintile, you put it by ethnicity here, which is very helpful. I'd also like to see it by quintile in these two populations.
Okay.
Can you put a little footnote in there totaling the numbers so we know how to tie these slides together? I am having a little bit of difficulty.
Sure. So this is the first income quintile, and it's two populations of the four. I've got the other charts. I just didn't make it.
This is not the 4192, the first quintile. Needy students met alternative merit criteria possibility. 4192, and then you broke it out to persistent.
This would be part of the 26. Well, this would be the 26.7. This is part of the 2677. See, I have some of these are alternate merit students, and the other ones are not alternate merit students.
The left-hand bars equate to the 2677, and the green bar 2 slides before it, but it's not 100%. It's
correct.
Whatever those bottom numbers add up to.
You need 3 charts,
and the right-hand bars equate to part of that 1515 in the red section on the same chart.
So could we have given, with this perfect hindsight, all the money that we had available in 2004 to students who met alternate merit.
Say the question one more time.
Could we have given all the funds that we had available in 2004? Were there enough students who got alternate merit to have given all the funds?
We made 5,915 awards in the lowest two income quintiles, actual, and we have 7,475 that were with the merit criteria, the alternate merit criteria that would have qualified.
On the three quintiles?
On the bottom two.
On the bottom two.
The neediest.
From 2,000 more than.
But we weren't in control of that because it was based on timing.
Yeah. No, I know. I'm just asking the hypothetical question. I understand.
How do you define succeed?
Succeed is if I had 100 students and 25 of them got a diploma, they got a certificate, they got some kind of success measure.
Still persisting?
Well, if they graduated, they may not be persisting anymore, right?
Well,
So it's either persisting more.
It's the sum of I either had some ending event, a positive ending event, or I'm still enrolled. I'm still persisting in higher ed. So it's the sum of those two numbers.
But what about if they're still enrolled, but at some point they're not enrolled anymore and they don't graduate? How does that factor into what we're calling a success rate?
Ultimately, when you go, if we look at the 2003 cohort, we have 5-year data for that particular cohort. So we continue to track those particular students. This one is the most recent that we have.
There's no way for us to know that today. You know, I mean, next year we can do a look back and we can see of those persistents, how many of those got certificates or degrees are dropped out. And so there's no way for another. What I'm hearing you say is we got to wait for another year to look back and see
for this particular
how many of those persistence category students pushed through some level of success as measured by a degree or graduation.
Correct. If you look though, you'll have some folks that will persist in year 3 and they'll be gone in year 4, and they'll be back in year 5.
Right.
So it's a transient moving calculation. So we grab information on a snapshot and then we evaluate it and look and see what happens. But I can get you the full picture of the full population by income quintile. That's a basic question. And I guess the agenda topic for this is discussion, so I don't want to dominate the conversation. Mr. Heldenfeld, can I move on?
I think you move to the next slide.
So next steps. I guess fundamental in all of this analysis is from a board perspective, from a staff perspective, is the need for TEOG to get substantially more funding. Clearly my analysis was very focused on public four-year institutions. We have a lot of needy students in community colleges that are currently getting Texas grants, that if we impose some of these merit criteria in the future, we're going to greatly impact community college students. So, step number 1 is for the coordinating board in the LAR process, because it is our number 1 request, to make sure that it is our number 1 request, because it's a key component for many of the other initiatives within the board. The second bullet point, which I'm particularly excited about, is the Higher Education Policy Institute. Lee Holcomb has been a participant in our data analysis. We have a rich data set now that has a lot of possibilities for so many different possibilities that I don't want to go into them at this particular point. But it's an exciting time because we have so much data available to us, and we can look and see what happens to this population of students. So we're going to utilize this particular group to continue our data analysis. something important for me and for you is to work with all of our stakeholders in the financial aid community. These are not insubstantial changes that we're discussing, but they are positive changes. And we need to make sure that we address concerns and issues, not just from the institution's perspective, but downtown and everybody else that's got a stake in this particular issue. And then the last bullet point, I wanted to make my closing statement, if you will. Financial aid has very much been funded very well, talked about a lot, but never really, in my opinion, integrated within the college readiness world. We have a lot of wonderful initiatives going on. We need to marry our financial aid strategies with our college readiness strategies. This is the perfect time to do those kinds of initiatives. So we're really very much at the cutting edge of being able to put our financial aid strategies in line with the other work that's going on within the agency.
Dan, I think Fred and a couple other people asked for some additional information, which I know you'll follow up on, which I'd like to get back in all our hands, because I know the commissioner has not yet come up with a recommendation yet as to what this potential needs plus merit might look like, and so I know that we're going to wait on that recommendation, but I think more data in our hands before that meeting would be useful. And one thing I'd ask you to go back and look at, it goes back to my first comment, is I continue to be surprised by the number of community college students receiving Texas grants. And the reason for that is when we originally started talking about need plus merit, and correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner, the thought was that, at least I was understanding, that the number of Texas grants going down to community college students was a lower number than 40%. I thought it was much lower than that, and that putting in merit would not impact, because majority of the community college students, because the majority of that money would be pushed out through TEOG. And I guess that number is surprising to me. I guess I'd like to look and see how do the TEOG grants compare to the Texas grants that are getting pushed down to the community college students.
Keep in mind, though, this is 2004. And I don't know what the TEOG funding levels were in 2004.
Okay.
$2,000 a year. $2 million a year.
So you're looking prospectively.
Okay.
There really was no TEOG of substance when this was going on. So grant eligibility was Texas grant. There was not really anything else.
What was TEOG in the most recent fiscal year?
$7 million.
$7 million.
In the LAR, I think we've asked for an additional $197 million for the biennium.
Right. So, and that was because I think at $7 million it was only serving some minuscule 4%. Our funding recommendation would up that to approximately 30 or 35.
Yeah, about 30.
Yeah, so we're still.
We're still running numbers, and we're not prepared to make a final recommendation to the board, but when we started thinking about a need plus merit strategy, and as you know, I've been pushing on this for some time. I always believed that we had a sufficient number of the very lowest income students achieving at high levels to take up the money. And these preliminary data indicate that's true. I also believe that even if the ethnic mix were to change a little bit, that you might have a slight diminishment in the number, for example, of African Americans or Hispanic students who would be funded through Texas Grant. That if you introduce the merit criteria, you would actually produce more graduates. You would fund fewer, but their success rates would be so much higher that you'd have a much greater rate of success. And these data show that. It's astonishing that if you introduce these merit criteria, that the success rates for African Americans go from 44.5% to 68%. And for Hispanic students, you go from 48.2 to 73%. As I also said, I think it's a good educational policy to send a message to all students, whatever their income level is, and we expect you to work hard and do well in high school and show that you're university ready. We've also said from the very beginning that we would only propose a need plus merit strategy for Texas Grant University students if we were able to raise the amount of funding for TEOG so that we wouldn't diminish the overall number of poor students who had access to higher education. But it would be a way of aligning students better with where they're likely to be more successful. If you're not well prepared to do university work, then it makes more sense to go to a community college where community college instruction is typically not distracted by an emphasis on research, which occurs in a lot of our universities. Community colleges pay more attention to developmental education, and in community colleges you have more options. You have not only an academic track, but a career and technical education track. And so it seems to me that given that we don't fund nearly as many students as we would like, that it makes sense to make an investment in the students who are most likely to be successful, and to send a message to students in high school: show that you're ready to do university level work. And as I said, we can use up all the Texas Grant money we currently have and what we might anticipate getting in the next session by funding high achieving students who are both low income and we would see a very broad distribution of ethnicity. We are going to run some more numbers. I have to say that I have some concerns about the SAT standard. The recommended standard by our consultants is much lower than the Texas College Readiness Standard. This isn't a number that we pick arbitrarily. This is the SAT score and the ACT scores that have been determined by the state to indicate college readiness. So we're going to run some more numbers and before we make a final recommendation, but the preliminary data suggests that it makes sense to go to this approach.
Fred, if we go to page 4, the bottom slide there, I'm really concerned about, it looks like a much larger percentage of African Americans would not be eligible compared to whites and Hispanics. Am I reading that right? Let's see. I think it's the next slide. Needy students meet alternative merit.
So page 4 you're on?
Yeah, page 4 of my
bottom slide.
Bottom
page 4. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So page 8.
I want to make sure I'm looking at the same thing.
Yeah,
So, I'm sorry, your question again?
Well, it seems like a larger percentage of African Americans would not be eligible as opposed to whites and Hispanics.
That's correct. But once again, if you do a rough calculation, the students who meet the alternate criteria, for example, for African Americans, if you look at the next page, and these are very rough calculations, about 2/3 of those African American students are successful. That's about 1,200 students. Of the students who do not meet the criteria, about 44.5% of those students are successful. So that is about 950. So even though fewer African American students would meet the alternative merit criteria, that would produce 1,200 successful students. If you look at the same numbers for those who don't meet the criteria, that would produce 950 successful students.
Good point. I mean, that really is the heart of this issue that we'll be talking about and trying to reach a decision on November 13th. Are we stewarding Texas resources best by focusing on increasing success versus increasing participation? What's the right balance there?
And once again, the data show, we have to run more data. The data show that we have plenty of the poorest students from different ethnic groups who are achieving at the levels we've defined as being meritorious.
I think the next step, I guess, Commissioner, is our meeting's November 13th. I guess what I'd ask is just that the full board would be able to have sufficient time with new data and your recommendation to allow us to really look at the data, ask questions before we get back in here on November 13th, so we can have plenty of time to understand it. So I would hope that by the 1st of November, Dan, we could be there, because I really think we need, at least 10 days, working days, to kind of look at this data, ask questions, be able to call back from staff and to make sure we understand what it says, because it is confusing to read. Just like you have to almost put those two charts together to understand what's it telling you, So
you should have seen the charts I deleted.
Well, I do think you've done an admirable job of trying to boil it down to about 7 charts for us, but I think even a combination of the one that the Commissioner just noted would really help us also. So,
and if we can better understand the universe of available funding as well.
Yeah.
And if we could receive that information, Commissioner, if you could put that in context for us, give us what you just said.
Yes.
I think it's important to notice that it's really not an either-or with participation and success. We're trying to move people through participation towards success. And with these new criteria, if we adopt them, combined with the push we're making on developmental ed and the increase in TEOG, it seems to me we're in a position for everyone to clearly see that we care about both of those things, access, participation, and success, and we're working on it all at once. But we need to put that context.
And one point we would make, because we've heard some expressions of concerns about directing by policy more students to community college. Students who transfer from community colleges to universities do as well as, in terms of ultimate graduation, do as well as students who started their post-secondary experiences in universities. Now, we don't transfer as many students as we would like, so there's a considerable amount of attrition. But the ones that do transfer are successful at the same rates as students who started in universities.
Well, I guess that begs the question, if we're going to, if that's all true, and the community colleges will be really the support, the entry for the balance of the folks who are eligible but are not meeting, then what will be ready for them at the end of their community college career such that they have funds to transfer into universities?
Well, I think the Texas grant with the current statute, if you get an associate's degree, you become Texas grant eligible.
Period, end of statement? Or are they going to have another wicket to go through in terms of eligibility?
No.
Well, financially.
They would have to have financial.
Right. Given that's the case. Where are those funds in terms of, are there segregated funds for those students?
No.
So they would compete.
The full financial model.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, we're still working on it.
Okay. I think that's an important thing to understand with regards to looking at all this stuff as well. Because if that's what we're going to postulate and put policy against, then we need to be ready to fund those students to articulate over to the
Absolutely.
higher, and I don't. Right now, we're basing 100% of what we're looking at just this population, right? So how do we factor in an estimated amount of those who would articulate?
We've started looking at that, and I guess my perspective being the finance-focused person, we look at the 04 cohorts, and because they look a lot like the 08 cohorts, and SAT scores, although they might have increased slightly, they haven't really changed very much. Class rank is always class rank. We have 5 years of data of recommended high school program graduates with need. We have merit criteria that should scale. We can plug it into 2008, and then we can look at, given our success and Texas grant persistence rates, we can project out into the out years of what is the financial ramifications of preloading TEOG students in a community college who are going to graduate with an associate's degree and matriculate to a four-year university. All that data is available and we have it. We just have to develop a model so that we can give you the financial impact and say it's going to cost $200 million this year and $500 million in 5 years. Those aren't the real numbers.
Yeah, I do think, though, I think we need to look at that, those numbers, but I think it also just points out the importance that when we're looking at this, Elaine, that we consider as part of our recommendation the 2+2 program.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I guess that's what I'm
Right, and that's where you're coming is that I think
exactly
that
right.
if we're making a needs plus merit type program, and then we need to have some component in there that focuses on the importance of 2+2 and making sure that those students that do finish those first 2 years of community college, that there's money there for them to move on. That's what I'm hearing you say.
That's exactly right, because the thoughts are, let's make sure that some of these folks that we're not covering are going to community colleges, are successful, then we need to make sure we're there to support them when they matriculate to the institutes of higher learning.
4 years.
Right.
4 years. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great point. Dan, Lois, thanks. I know we need to vote on some of these recommendations. Before we do that, we do have several people in the audience that talked to Ms. Bricker or Lois about addressing the board. I'd like to give you the opportunity to do that now. I would ask that you try to, if you can, I know this is difficult, but try to limit your comments, I'd say 5 minutes each. I'd really like to finish this segment by 11:30 because we have another major segment to go into, that is uniform GPA, and I'd like to make sure we provide sufficient time to address that. So with that said, I will ask, I think there's a staff member from Senator Ellis's office, Ms. Joyce. Can you help me with your last name?
Sure, it's Niamu.
Okay, great to have you here. Thanks for coming. And then we're going to have, following her, I would say Carol McDonald. Carol's in the audience. Then Lisa Blazer, Rick Renshaw, and then also David Johnson, Lee High School. Okay, and you could all come up if you'd like to right now. And again, I don't have a red button for timing, but I'm going to try to hold you to 5 minutes if I possibly can. Even though we value your input, but as I said, we've got to move on 11:30. So,
Sure, and I'll just be reading a statement from Senator Ellis. He states, "Thank you for allowing me to address you again about this issue and for honoring my request that you take more time to collect data and consider the impact of feasibility study recommendation 8 to add additional merit components for eligibility for the Texas Grant Program. I appreciate your effort to ensure that the students in the state who need the most financial aid support, those in the lowest income quintiles of our state, are not being left without the financial resources they need to receive a higher education in Texas. I feel inclined to share the short statement because as much as I appreciate your effort, I want to be clear about the information I believe you must examine to make an informed decision on Recommendation 8. The Board should not vote on the merit recommendation unless the Board knows the following. 1. If Recommendation 8 is adopted, which students lose access to financial aid by income quintile, ethnicity, and by the type of institution attended? In other words, at four-year public institutions, how do students fare by race and income at the two flagship institutions? At the aspiring flagship institutions? At institutions serving various regions of the state? At institutions serving primarily African American students? And at institutions serving primarily Hispanic students? What is the impact on students, especially those attending four-year public institutions, whose admissions policies are considered open enrollment policies as compared to other four-year public institutions? What is the number 3, I apologize. What is the impact on students who come from households with an income in the lowest two income quintiles compared with the higher third quintile? How many students in Texas graduate from the Distinguished Achievement Program curriculum? How many of those students are African American, Hispanic? How many of those students come from households with an annual income in the lowest two income quintiles? What percentage of high schools in predominantly urban areas offer the DAP program? Is there a substantiated correlation between the number of students who graduated from Texas high schools under the recommended high school program as compared to the DAP program with regard to college graduation rates? Only about 25% of adults in this state have earned a baccalaureate degree, so I understand the Board's push to ensure that students with the most potential in the state are given the financial support they need to graduate. But let's not miss the forest for the trees. Even those students who are not classified as college-ready by standardized tests, who were not at the top of their classes, and who have not graduated from Distinguished Achievement or IB programs, still have the potential to graduate from college. In fact, those are the students who need financial assistance the most because they are from households that don't have the resources for tutors and test prep classes to help them be successful. Those students, the students who wouldn't otherwise have access to higher education, have been the beneficiaries of the Texas Grant Program since I helped author it almost 10 years ago. They should remain the beneficiaries today. There are good programs in the state, and there should be for the most successful students. That is why I support Recommendation 7 to maintain the Be On Time loan program as an incentive program, and Recommendation 9 to add a $1,000 grant for students who completed the Distinguished Achievement Program. But the Texas Grant Program was not created for the kid who can probably get scholarships and financial support from a variety of sources because he or she has been successful. It was created for that student who has worked hard, graduated from a challenging program, which the recommended high school program is, and who comes from a home with minimal financial resources. I won't tell you how to vote, but I do expect to see the data I have outlined today before you do vote. And I ask you to consider the questions I have asked and determine whether they have been sufficiently answered before you vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheryl?
Thank you for letting me talk with you again today. I know we've seen a lot of each other in the last few months. That's a little unusual. I think I only appeared before the coordinating board twice in the 25 years before that.
We're so blessed.
First, let me tell you that our reactions to the recommendations of your consultant and your staff are mixed. And I want to start with where we agree. There are several of those points. First, we agree with the staff that the TEG program and the Texas Grant Program should not be merged. We also agree that funding of those two programs and the TEOG should be separate. And we agree that programs should continue to be administered as campus-based programs because it reduces the state's cost and provides service to students where they need it on campus. Where we disagree
We do not disagree that some alignment of programs and requirements between TEG and Texas Grant may be desirable. However, we believe that alignment should not have an adverse impact on student populations that private institutions serve. We also believe that alignment should not increase state costs. Alignment should not reduce efficiency in the use of funds, and alignment should not be a backdoor way of altering the missions or the enrollment criteria of the state's private colleges. So let me talk just a minute about student populations. Let us begin with Recommendation 5, maintain the components of TEG that serve non-traditional students pending the merger of programs. And Recommendation 10, creating a merit component allowing non-traditional students access to Texas Grant. Understand that there's a little interpretation here because the consultants had one set of criteria and the staff has tinkered with that all along the line. Texas Grant and TEG differ in two ways in determining what students they serve. First, let me explain that TEG was designed not so much as to equalize tuition between public and private institutions as to provide low and middle income students with some financial aid for foregoing the benefit of the state subsidy that every Texas resident student, rich or poor, receives by enrolling at a state university where tuition has been and probably always will be lower. Because of that, TEG is more inclusive than Texas Grant in that it serves needy Texas residents who would have benefited from the state subsidy if they had attended a public institution. This includes undergraduates, graduate and professional students made eligible by Attorney General's Opinion H-322 of 1974, and adults entering college late in life. Texas Grant serves only those undergraduates who enroll quickly after completing high school. Because it is important to the missions of private institutions to provide graduate and professional education and to serve adult students, ICUT institutions believe the ability to provide TEG to those students should be preserved. In fact, the consultants suggested in Recommendation 5 that the components of TEG that serve adult or non-traditional students should be maintained while the programs were being aligned for merger. In the context of the staff's recommendations before you, traditional adult students have only one option for beginning college careers if they need financial aid, that is, entering a public community college, where they will have access to financial aid through TEOG. We suggest these adult students not be limited to enrollment in public community colleges, especially when so many private colleges have either created programs for adult students or have arranged scheduling to accommodate those who juggle work, family, and school. Surely it is in the public interest to make it possible for these students to receive aid and independent institutions if those institutions best serve their needs. To make that possible, TEG perhaps should be aligned with TEOG for non-traditional students. Second, in general, needy Texas residents who meet the admissions criteria of the private institution in which they're enrolled are eligible for TEG, while only needy Texas residents who completed the recommended high school curriculum of Texas public schools may receive a Texas Grant. While we can agree that the recommended high school curriculum is a good college prep curriculum, we all also know that it is not the only legitimate college prep curriculum. In fact, even with the highest grades and a top class rank, the recommended high school curriculum is not adequate preparation to gain a student admission to Rice or Trinity, highly selective institutions. Although the graduates of accredited private high schools are eligible for Texas Grant, the fact that their curriculum must match point for point the recommended high school curriculum of the public schools make it difficult for them to receive one. Furthermore, the Texas Grant program is completely closed to the homeschool population. Because most private colleges and universities are affiliated with a denomination, religious order, or a faith tradition, serving the graduates of private denominational high schools is an important part of the missions of ICUT institutions. Furthermore, ICUT institutions have found homeschool students are highly motivated, very disciplined, and very well prepared for college-level work. We believe that preserving access to the TEG program for these students is important to institutional missions and to the diversity of educational background in our student bodies. In our judgment, making the preparation requirements for TEG identical to those of Texas grants harms student populations at private institutions and does injury to the missions of those institutions. If we can agree that aligning the requirements of TEG and Texas grant is not the same thing as making them identical, then we may be able to find common ground on this. Making the criteria identical might limit needy students at highly selected institutions are willing to serve. This is not acceptable to individual institutions. Requirements that make it impossible to provide access for students of open enrollment denominational and minority-serving institutions are also unacceptable. However, we believe that some alignment might be accomplished, and working this out may take some time. We think the consultants may have thought of this when they said there ought to be a long-range plan for working out the alignment between TEG and Texas grant. As a beginning step in this process, ICUT does support the efforts of your staff to bring the TEG's satisfactory academic progress or staff requirements in alignment with those of Texas grants. The other area where alignment is undesirable can be found in the details of Recommendation 13, which
Cheryl, if we can do it quick, we're
Sorry.
okay, we've got a lot to...
I understand.
Thank you.
If you look at page 3 of your agenda item 2, you'll see the specific points of alignment. The first one is to create a uniform formula for determining student awards. Without any degree of interpretation, a uniform formula for determining student awards sounds as if it's meant to produce the same grant amount for students in similar family situations regardless of what institution makes that award. This is one form of alignment that would increase state costs, and it does it in two ways. First, your consultants believe that the TEG grant amount should be the same as the higher Texas grant amount. TEG has and always likely will have a lower grant amount than Texas grant, and that's because it's based on a percentage of the subsidy provided to students at public universities. The TEG statute sets two maximum grant amounts for eligible students. One is half of what the legislature appropriated for a full-time student in a state university, and that was $3,444 in 2007. That serves students that have what we call ordinary need. Students with exceptional need, now defined as students with an EFC of $1,000 or less, they receive a grant that's up to 75% of the subsidy amount. The current TEG maximum grants are lower than they were in 2007. Raising the TEG grant amount for a student with ordinary need to the level of Texas grant increases the grant amount by over $1,900 and the amount for exceptional need by nearly $300. These maximum grants save the state between 25 and 50% of what it costs the state to subsidize those students through formula funding. At this point, ICUT institutions see no need to eliminate the feature of the TEG program that saves the state money when its neediest students can receive a grant amount almost equal to Texas grant, and its students with ordinary needs receive reasonable assistance from the state, an average grant of about $2,900. The second way that this alignment would increase costs is by prescribing the grant amount by formula. Currently, ICUT institutions take the students' resources and their own resources into consideration when they determine how large a TEG grant should be. What that has meant is that TEG awards I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought. You've been told repeatedly that TEG shows 70% of eligible students, and that is absolutely true. What you haven't been told is how TEG manages to do that, how independent institutions manage to do that, with less than 60% of the funds needed to fully fund the program. It is partly related to that grant amount and our ability to mix our resources with the state's resources to put together a package that makes sense for a particular student. We believe that aligning these formulas for determining the grant amount would do a disservice to the state and increase its cost. There are several other points that I have that I will put in writing to you that have to do that go on.
I think having your written comments and that, Carol, would be very helpful, because I think you really do bring up some good points, I think, that cause me to step back from maybe a couple of these recommendations and say, should we take those up November 13th, okay? And so I think if there's those additional ones, we'll have to decide whether we take action on any of these recommendations today or not.
I do have a visual aid that I think might help you with this one.
Okay, that'd be great. But I would encourage you, Carol, to do that because, as I said, we'll be going to a final vote on November 13th for it. And I appreciate your comments on the graduate professional field and the non-traditional and the issue about homeschools. I hadn't thought about that. So all those are good and valid points.
I want you to look at this handout that I provided to you because I think it helps explain something that you were talking about a little earlier with regard to income quintiles. You may recall the graph that's in the first page of the handout, and that's the one that was in the consultant's report. It shows you the current distribution of Pell Grants, TEG, and Texas Grants among the income quintiles. As all of you probably know, Texas Grant has been awarded to students mostly on the basis of a $4,000 EFC cutoff so that they can treat families similarly. But I think you need to know that what an EFC does is try to treat families in a way where if their income is higher or lower, it all sort of equals out. And to demonstrate this, I've given you a photograph that I cut out of the Austin American Statesman a few years ago that pretty much dramatically illustrates this. You will see a family where there are 2 adults and 6 children. When the oldest boy finishes college, if he finishes in 4 years, his sister will immediately begin college, but there will still be 4 children at home to support. The second son will begin college 1 year after his sister starts, and so there will be at least 2 children in college and 3 children at home for some period of time. And before the second son graduates, the triplets start college. Now, this family may have as much as $75,000 or so of income, but their EFC is likely to be low, and that family is likely to always qualify for some financial aid. So when you look across those income quintiles, remember it's not a perfect measure of need. It's the EFC that is a better measure of need than family income is.
Thank you very much. Again, I encourage you to give us any other comments.
I will do that.
Lisa Blazer?
Yes.
Assistant VP for Financial Aid at UTSA.
Thank you so much for allowing me to talk with you this morning. I just want to give a few brief comments in regards to the merit criteria for Texas Grant. I went in and looked at our data just really quickly for the 2007-08 year. I wanted to see what kind of effect it would have on our students at UTSA. I looked at our students that we awarded during their initial year for 2007-08, and with the criteria that the feasibility study is promoting, the 50%, upper 50%, and the additional requirements, about 15% of those students wouldn't have been eligible, which is not a large number. When I look at the alternative merit requirements, almost 40% of our students that we awarded during the 2007-08 award year would not have been eligible for the Texas Grant. So as I was listening to all of the information, I understand the success rates, and we definitely want to put our money in the state of Texas towards those students that are going to be successful, but we also have a lot of students, especially at institutions like UTSA, that are trying to build up those students. And so I know that in the statement from Senator Ellis, he talked about looking at the different types of institutions. When I was listening, I wrote down a question, well, where were these students enrolled? because I know what my allocation is versus what the allocation and what some of the flagship institutions are receiving, and they're significantly more, obviously, than UTSA, and they serve a different population of students. This is something that we've actually even talked about within the UT system. The UT system has a broad array of students that we serve, so we can't necessarily dictate a particular formula for all of the institutions. And you can see that in some of our tuition guarantees. UT Arlington just came out with a higher income level. UT Brownsville has for our different tuition guarantees because of the population we serve. So I would encourage you, as you're looking at merit requirements, that we maybe look at those different types of institutions and the populations that we serve. We serve at UTSA, almost half of our students that apply for financial aid are Pell eligible, so we are serving a low income group. I agree with Carol on the EFC versus the income group, because we do have, based on the population we serve, we have unique family situations that may be a little bit different. They may have a higher income but a lower EFC. So that's mainly what I wanted to just tell you, what's happening at UTSA, and hopefully before we jump into a new merit requirement, that we really look at the effect it's going to have on the students that are going to now be ineligible. And it is quite a jump, and so if we can phase in some type of program as opposed to making that immediate, I don't know when we're proposing utilizing this new merit criteria, but if it does jump to the upper third in the class rank and a higher SAT score, I do feel like at some of our institutions, students that really need the Texas grant and what the Texas grant was initially designed for are going to lose out on those funds. And, we talked about the designated tuition that we have at our state institutions. Those are still very limited. There's only so many funds that we have available. Some of the flagship institutions and institutions that have been around for a while may have more endowments and be able to supplement that in other ways. At UTSA, because we're so young, we don't have a strong endowment, so we're still looking at building that as a growing institution. So that would be my request, is to really look at the effects at the different institutions. I understand looking at ethnicity and the income quintiles, but also look at what's happening at our institutions before we make any kind of decisions on changing that merit criteria, because it is quite a jump, especially for some of our students. That's really all that I wanted to share.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that. And I'd ask, I assume we're taking notes. Do you have written testimony?
I do not, but I can provide that I did not.
I just want to make sure we pick your comments up in the minutes to make sure we take that into consideration. I think that would be helpful. Then also we have David Johnson.
Yes.
Lee High School.
Yes. I'll go ahead and begin, since I know we're on a tight time frame here. I was invited here after a visit to my high school, Lee High School in Houston, Texas. Lori Bricker and Ms. Phillips and Commissioner Paredes stopped by my high school one afternoon and engaged in a conversation on how would these recommendations impact urban schools such as Lee High School. So I'm very appreciative of being invited here today. In HISD, there's been much conversation, and I wouldn't call it dialogue. It's been a lot about just talking to each other, throwing facts and accusations, and it's been very pleasant to come here today and to hear comments from around the state and to hear personally HEIA's data. It's when you see it personally, it's not as confrontational sometimes as the raw numbers when they come out in the press. I just wanted to appreciate that. It's been very pleasant this morning listening. We've been listening to data that's been very macro. I'm going to talk about some data right now that's very micro. I'm going to talk about a high school senior class of 310 students. I'm going to talk about a high school that's located in an area that's predominantly immigrant, Southwest Houston. I'm going to talk about a high school where 86% of the students are on free or reduced lunch, 42% are limited English proficient, and 27% have been in the United States for 3 years or less. So, Lori Bricker and Commissioner Paredes asked me to look at what would it look like if we were to take the 2007 graduating class from Lee High School and we were to run these numbers very similar to what you did over at UTSA. And this is what we discovered. You have this paper right here. If you look on page 2, I'm just going to briefly give a synopsis of this. Under ATIA's recommendations, out of a graduating class last year of 308, 154 seniors would have qualified under the requirements based upon the top 50%. Remember, I work at a high school. 86% of students are free or reduced lunch. 42% are limited English proficient. So when I looked at my data, I was surprised to see that the only criteria my students could meet on that would be the top 50%. Then when I looked at the commissioner's recommendations, the number dropped to 93 students out of 308. Ms. Bricker then asked me to see what those numbers would look like if under the current policy that we have, which is the criterion is simply the Texas recommended plan. And 300 seniors, we had 8 seniors who decided to go core. Okay. Now, those are pretty startling numbers when I looked at them. So I want to come back and I want to say that I've been at Lee High School this is my 13th year, and I've been doing college advising 7. We were the first high school to open up a comprehensive college center. We've had a few years under our belt looking at this population. I want to concur with Commissioner Paredes. When I look at those 93 students, they're real students to me. I can see their faces. They are more successful in college, and they have the fact that when I look at things such as the number of AP classes they had, their attendance, their GPA, okay, what I see consistently is my top third of my students do better in universities. So I was not surprised by the data that I saw up there. The biggest concern what this hit me when I looked at it was just how important it is that we give equal funding to TEOG. That is just essential. That if for some reason these recommendations were to be pushed through and TEOG funding was not to be increased, I'm going to put a going out of business sign on my college center. It would just be that crushing. Now, on the opposite, I do want to say that I appreciate the fact of adding merit criteria. We have seen in our high school, I put that on the 4th page, we have gone from having 15 students in pre-calculus to now we're running four calculus classes. Okay? We're getting to a point at Lee High School, close to a third of our students will be taking a calculus class. Okay? So incentives do work. Okay. But at the same time, I have this other part of my population where they will be starting off at the community college. And this is the last thing I want to put in. What I've always liked about the Texas grant is that it requires all students going to college to graduate with more math and science, whether they're going to study auto mechanics or whether they're going to study mechanical engineering. My fear would be that, and one of my recommendations that I put in here was that to look at somehow on the TEOG or students going into community colleges, especially for going after associate's degrees, I would hate to lose the incentive that when I talk to a freshman class at my high school, we get kids to sign up for the recommended program because of money. Okay? They're not going to just say, oh, I'm going to be more prepared for college. This is one of the greatest incentives we have as secondary counselors to give our students is the fact that if they do X, Y, and Z criteria, not if they score some in the distance score on an SAT test, okay, but that if they can master these courses, and granted, a pre-calc class at my high school might be different than a pre-calc class at another high school. And that might be why our SAT scores are different. But the fact is that by bringing students, as students arrive, we find in these inner urban and rural high schools where they don't have the advantages of other students, It takes us time. Students, they go forward, they go back, they show up, they come back. And I think we have to be very careful in how we set up merit criteria. And with that, I will close my remarks. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Any questions for our panelists at all? We appreciate your passion, your interest. Again, if you have written testimony, we'd really like to have copies of that. And we just appreciate you sharing with some of us that had plane troubles to be an hour late to sit and talk to us about this. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
As I've listened to this testimony, what we were hoping to do to our joint committee was to try to look at some of these recommendations and try to possibly adopt these today, with the thought being that when we get to November 13th, that we can focus on the needs plus merit issue and those issues that I think we have not been able to get all the data on. And as I listened to some of the testimony today, the ones that I heard the most, and Carol's still here, our staff had recommended that we consider adopting, if you look at the handout that was given us, recommendations 1, 4, 6, 7, 12, 14, 16, 9, and 13. And the one that I heard that there was a few comments made on, Cheryl, was recommendation 13 that you'd brought up. And there was really more detailed information in our package in terms of specific issues which were being looked at in terms of the decentralized approach issue. So I think there's some merit to maybe considering those first 3, 6, 1, 4, 6, 7, 12, 14, 16, 9 for adoption, because I have not, to me, that seems that there's consensus around those to adopt those today. And then what I'd like to do is to look at some of the comments that, Carol, you submitted, and for us to look at 13 when we come back on November the 13th. They've also recommended that we not adopt the consultant's recommendations 5, 10, and 11. And I think we've had universal comments from that, and to adopt the consultant's recommendations 2, 3, and 15 with modifications. I'm trying to find where 2, 3, and 15. Now, I'm not making a motion, but what I propose is that I heard several comments also made on recommendations 2 and 3, and those were the comments about,
about the alignment of PEG with Texas Grant.
Right. I guess that was recommendation 5, really.
Well, there's actually, staff is recommending that we not adopt 5, but that we look at 2 and modify the adoptions of 2 and 3. So the staff recommendation that deals with alignment are recommendations 2 and 3.
So, I think what we could do is bring 2 and 3 back in here to discuss along with 13 on November the 13th. And, 15th, I think we can adopt. I think we can adopt 15. So let me see if I can circle all back around. What I'm hearing is to adopt 1, 4, 6, 7, 12, 14, 16, 9, and 15 with modifications. And the rest of them we would table to discuss at our November the 13th meeting. Any comments, or would anybody like to make any other suggestions or a motion to do so?
Well, let me make the motion, then we can, and if there's a second, we can have further discussion. I move that this committee recommend adoption of HEIA's recommendations 1, 4, 6, 7, 12, 14, 16, 9, and the modified number 15.
Have a motion. Second by Brenda. Any discussion?
Does staff have any comment on how that does or does not affect preparation for November 13th?
to look at it and do the best we can with the information that you want on. I don't have them all circled on here, but 2 and 3, I've got them written down. We'll do the best we can to get you data by November 1st to help you make decisions on all of those.
And I think we heard some requests for certain types of data from some of the testimony, and then also what I heard in terms of waiting on 13, 2, and 3, along with 8, which we were already going to defer, really have to do with better definition of what we mean by aligning TEG and Texas Grant and taking into account ICUT's concerns, particularly on the first bullet point under 13 about the uniform formula.
Right, and our recommendation, even as staff, is to do this as a long-term project to see if it even makes sense. It's not to say go forward to the legislature and say we want everything aligned for this legislative session. It really is. Let's look at it. Let's work with the schools. Let's work with ICUT to see if it makes sense to do.
I think one of the things, maybe what we could do to help better define what we mean by long-term, to help these recommendations is to talk about what is our transition plan, come up with some recommended timing. Secondly, be sure that it's clear that some of these things really do hinge on what happens with funding.
Yeah.
And where that's a contingency so that it's,
right.
That obviously affects the transition or the ability to do some of these things.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Any other comments, Lois, at all?
I just wanted to comment regarding the TEG and the private institutions. Is there any data that perhaps show that kids that do go to private universities that are not so selective as Rice and Trinity and come from that lower, not only lower quintile, but also perhaps not as prepared, quote unquote, as we defined in the initial or the recommended alternate merit criteria. Do they perform better because of the smaller environments, the smaller classrooms, the more hands-on, to make sure that we understand that success rate?
We've got the TEG cohort, and we can go back and do the same analysis that we did with Texas Grant to see how it breaks up by income quintile, by type of institution, and by ethnicity, to see what the different merit criteria do, and to see if those without any merit criteria too, how they succeed. And that's what you're asking for,
I think
right?
that'd be very helpful because there may be a distinguishing feature there that we need to understand as a board.
Good point.
Yeah, we've got that data. We can do that.
Another comment?
I have a question, and forgive me if this is just exactly what you just said. I don't quite understand it. Do we have a way of knowing what additional funds the Texas Grant recipient has?
Yes, we can look and see what other. We can match it with the financial aid database to see what other awards the student receives.
I think that's Fred. I think earlier they asked for other institutional grant money. When we talk about Texas Grant, understand what the other institutional money available is.
And whether the students who did not succeed did not have as much money, and there may be some other factor. We need to know that we're looking at all the factors we possibly can in terms of success.
Okay, any other questions? We have a motion on the floor. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed by the same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. For those patient people out there in the audience, could we take a 5-minute break? And I promise you we'll come back in 5 minutes and start on uniform GPA. Again, I thank you for the patience and indulgence of our audience waiting for a discussion of the uniform grade point average. We were originally scheduled to consider adoption of this today, and there have been numerous modifications made to the original rules which were set forth, and so I am recommending today that we postpone any vote on uniform GPA until our January board meeting, but we would still like to have discussion of the issue as well as some of the modifications which have been made during the process and receiving comments. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Lynn Phillips, who serves as Vice Chairman of the Participation Success Committee and has been actively engaged in this process for this discussion. And well, I think if hopefully, and I don't want to set a time frame, but we have one other topic on the agenda which I do not think will take us very long at the end. So I would hope to get to that topic by, say, 1:20, so maybe we could break for lunch at 1:30 and then go into our next meeting at 2 o'clock. So turn it over to Dr. Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm so sorry that Laurie isn't here. She is the expert on this topic and has spent so much time on it the last few weeks. And I wish I could channel her, but since I can't, let me invite the Commissioner to kick us off by telling us where we are and what your recommendation is.
Well, I'd like to read a brief statement. First of all, I want to say that I believe that the postponement of formal board action is a good thing. Just yesterday I received comments from the Career Technology Association of Texas, the Texas Association of School Boards, the Texas Association of School Administrators, and several other representatives of the public school community, and my colleagues on the staff and I would appreciate the extra time to consider fully their recommendations. In addition, the Select Committee on Public School Accountability, chaired by Senator Shapiro and Representative Eisler, met yesterday and identified several points of consensus, such as educating students across Texas to post-secondary readiness and including college readiness standards and end-of-course exams that I would like to take into account as we further refine our recommendations. At this point, my key preliminary recommendations for the uniform GPA calculation are in front of you. They are, once again, still general. We still have other work to do, given, as I said, the recommendations we've received from people in the public education sector. Very briefly, we're proposing that the methodology for calculating uniform GPA begin after May 1st, 2009, and all academic courses in the recommended high school program shall be included in the calculation, regardless of when the courses were taken, so that students who took Algebra 1, for example, in the 8th grade or even the 7th grade would be able to count those courses. We're also recommending that a weight of 1.0 be given to advanced placement courses, international baccalaureate courses, and dual credit courses, and including the career-oriented courses that are listed in the academic course guide manual. We'll take a look at courses beyond the guide manual and recommend those for inclusion in the GPA calculation that track with university programs of study. We are also recommending, this is a shift from what we had proposed before, that pre-AP and pre-IB courses be weighted at a 0.5 grade point, and that we will monitor the development of these courses, and we hope that within 5 years that all pre-AP courses would be expected to meet the laying the foundation standards. These are standards that public school educators all over the state are familiar with. They've been developed by the Peter O'Donnell Foundation. There is an extraordinary amount of data to demonstrate that these courses are rigorous and do lead to success in academic and actual advanced placement courses. And we would hope that either these standards or comparable standards would be adopted by school districts so that we can ensure that pre-AP courses are actually successful and actually represent a substantially higher level of rigor to justify the extra grade point credit. We would also recommend that we appoint a GPA advisory committee that would be composed of representatives from higher education, public education, and workforce sector that would monitor the changing landscape of public education, curricular change in both higher education and public education. So we would want some kind of process that would allow us to look at new courses as they develop, to monitor the quality of dual credit courses, to ensure that they conform with coordinating board rules. I was surprised to find out that there is widespread lack of awareness that we have rules governing the offering of these courses, and presumably they haven't been adopted as comprehensively as they should be. On the back of that page, you will see the courses that are under consideration to be included in the GPA calculation. We've once again refined our recommendations so that we're clear about the fine arts courses that would be included, and the electives the college prep electives that would be included. Once again, it's important regarding career and technical education courses. There seems to be a good deal of misunderstanding about the recommendation not to include certain courses. We are respectful of the importance of career and technical education. Most universities do very little in the way of career and technical education. Community colleges have responsibility for the bulk of career and technical education, and those courses would certainly prepare students to do career and technical education work in community colleges. But we will include those career and technical education courses in the calculation for admission to universities that do lead to programs that universities offer, like accounting, such as agriculture, criminal justice, and so forth. All of those courses would count, but we need some kind of monitoring system to make sure we capture all the right courses. As always, the continuing development of GPA standards will be guided by three principles to help move Texas successfully towards the goals of, by these principles, I should say, to help move Texas successfully towards the goals of closing the gaps. Second, to promote academic rigor and post-secondary success for all students in Texas public education, and to increase understanding among Texas high school students and parents about genuine, especially university readiness. Although Texas has made significant progress in preparing students for college and the skilled workforce in recent years, we still lag well behind leading states. And I'd like to offer the board a few issues to take into account as we continue to develop our recommendations for the board. First of all, a study that you've heard me cite before, the American College Testing Service, which tests over 70,000 students for college readiness every year in Texas, and its latest 2008 study determined that only 20% of Texas high school graduates are college ready across the board. Point number two, 50% of Texas college students require developmental education. In regard to so-called advanced courses, a 2006 study by the National Center for Educational Accountability described the phenomenon of course credit inflation and cited findings that demonstrate that advanced, and this is a very important point, that advanced course credits in high school do not predict college persistence. Much of the data for this article came from Texas, including some data from the coordinating board. To be fair, what is happening in Texas is part of a disturbing national trend. As in Texas, national data show that only a relatively few number of high school students are exposed to the sort of academic rigor that will prepare them well for life beyond high school. A new study by the Strong American Schools organization, ominously entitled Diploma to Nowhere, notes that nearly 80% of college students placed in remedial education had a B average or higher in high school. Whatever rigor is available in high schools in Texas and elsewhere, the evidence suggests that it is disproportionately unavailable to low-income students. Data on the availability of AP courses indicate as much, and the College Board itself, which administers the AP program, warns that pre-AP courses typically lead to tracking, and the College Board advocates instead for educational practice whereby pre-AP courses, pre-IB courses, and honors courses are taken by all students. In conclusion, I want to quote from a new study from the National Summit on Academic Rigor and Relevance entitled "No Longer at Risk, A Nation at Peril." This is a follow-up study to the celebrated study from the 1980s called "A Nation at Risk." And this study concludes that we're no longer at risk, we're in serious peril. The report notes that the U.S. is falling further behind academically and offers several recommendations for our high schools, the first two of which are these, and this is a quote. First, a single rigorous standard must be developed at every level of education that lets students really know how well they are doing. Second, we need to define and implement one rigorous course of study for all students. All is italicized in the article. And as one final indication of how unevenly we distribute rigor to our students in high school, not only in Texas but around the country, let me quote directly from a recent speech given October 1st, 2008 at the JFK Junior Forum at Harvard University by U.S. Secretary of Education Margaret Spellins. This is a quote. Last year I sent back to the U.S. Treasury more than $500 million in unused academic grants for low-income college students. Why? Because not enough had been offered or taken rigorous coursework in high school, coursework essential for college admission and success. As educators from both higher and public education continue to deliberate on the issue of uniform grade point average calculation, I trust that our mutual goal will be to promote rigor and high achievement for all Texas students. All of our youngsters from whatever background, affluent or poor, of whatever ethnicity, deserve nothing less.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think your remarks were profound and give us a lot to think about. Open up for discussion on the committee. You want to go through?
I'll have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding the 15-member GPA Advisory Committee, would there be any thought or consensus to have that 15-member committee weighted heavily with public school folks, so that since this does affect the public school, secondary especially, that they have a large say into this?
Well, I think it affects both higher education and public education equally.
I realize that, but nevertheless, I mean, this is something that is really viewed as a pipeline issue, and we've got to fix the first part in order to have, not fix, wrong word, but give a larger voice to the beginning so that we can get to the end. So, if I may recommend that out of the 15-member GPA Advisory Committee, if we can have a majority represented by superintendents or whatever public school officials you think appropriate, I think that'd be helpful in this process going forward.
When you say the coordinating board will establish, that is defined as the board of directors.
I had in mind the board.
Okay.
Members of the board.
Yeah, I wanted to make that clear. Well, then I think, it should be up to the board as a unit to have that discussion and to make that indication of where the weighting should be. I think that might be a more productive way of doing it rather than saying we have a majority here or a minority there.
If things are going out for comments, I think that, and they are, it's very nebulous still. It's a 15-member advisory committee that would be representatives from, three large areas with no idea as to what it is. I realize we'll have good debate and dialogue about as the board establishes this 15-member committee, but I think some guideline to give the public when they review this would be helpful.
But I do think that guideline should come from the board if the board has the ultimate responsibility. I just think if we haven't had time to have that discussion, I don't know that it would make sense to set those guidelines up front, although I do understand what you're saying.
Is it clear the way it's written what the coordinating board refers to?
Well, I had in mind that this advisory group would take a look at, for example, there's been some concern expressed about the conversion of numerical grades to, or numerical grades on a 100-point scale to numerical grades on a 4-point scale. And there's been some concern about whether the threshold for pass should be 70 on a 100-point scale or some lower number. And I would think that the GPA advisory committee would take a look at this issue. I mentioned that there are career and technical education courses that are not necessarily listed in the lower division academic course guide manual that this body might want to take a look at. Curricula change over time. I would suggest that this would be a committee that would be in place over time, and that it would advise the coordinating board about any adjustments and which courses should be calculated in the GPA depending on the changing nature of curricula at both the high school and the university levels. If, for example, more universities offer courses in specific career and technical education fields, then that would, it seems to me, dictate that such courses offered in high schools should be included in the GPA calculation. There are other questions. For example, how do we monitor the quality control of pre-AP courses to make certain that they justify a weighted grade point average? I've stipulated my recommendation that we should expect such courses to adhere to laying the foundation standards or comparable standards, and I would think that this advisory committee would take a look at such issues as well.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Shepherd?
First of all, I want to make a statement because there is no way in the world that I could return all the phone calls or all the emails or everything else we receive. So I want everybody to know, because I've talked to enough board members, that people obviously have been very interested in this, to say the least, and have taken it all very seriously. So those that I couldn't respond to, just the fact that you didn't get a return phone call, don't think it because we were not looking at it. Then a comment. Elaine, I understand what you're saying, but to start off in the very beginning and say that we're going to take the advisory committee with a whole lot of stakeholders on it and put a whole bunch of just one area of the stakeholders on it, I think we need to talk about that, because I personally have some concerns about it. So at the point in time that we kind of figure out what we're doing, it's a brand new idea. Obviously, the legislature challenged us in the beginning and asked us to take a look at it. Raymond is suggesting voluntarily that we form this group, which I personally think is a good idea. It's a good way for us to get and hopefully manage the information, other than the way that it's been, I don't know, even managed is a good word with what Raymond's had to go through in the last number of months. So hopefully this brings something into being in terms of a process to it. But I think we need to have a lot of discussion about how that group is organized.
It's so key to the rest of the recommendations moving forward that I think the better off we can define what this advisory committee is all about, the better off we will be. And if you're saying that once we post this, we will have, I'm sure, certain recommendations from a lot of folks as we've had this whole time about what that 15-member committee should be, how that should be composed and the structure of it, then I think that obviously we need to take that into consideration. Just some sort of inference as to what we mean by this and what this coordinating board, as the ultimate appointers of this, is thinking, I thought would be helpful. That's all.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Speaking personally, I would certainly want to see, superintendent, principal, school board member on this advisory committee, as well as an administrator from one of our universities or colleges, and people of similar roles from higher education. I don't know that there's anything precluding us from discussing it, but this is a pretty recent concept. I think it's a good one. Raymond, I would ask, there's two questions, not only what the makeup of the committee is, but how they're selected. And I'm curious if you envision we as board members appointing or nominating these advisory committee members, or there being some other mechanism. Can you kind of... Yes,
I was thinking of a composition that would be made of 5 people from higher education, 5 from public education, 5 from the workforce sector. We have, for example, we can ask Robert Scott to nominate people from the public education sector, Larry Temple from the Texas Workforce Commission, nominate people from that sector, and then board members can nominate individuals from higher education. I would like to see some teachers participate in this process, because they're the ones that are most directly involved in promoting quality of education at all levels. I would think that the ultimate appointments, we could gather nominees in any way you like. If you would like us to gather nominees from more than the sources I indicated, that would be easy to do, and then it would be ultimately up to the board to actually appoint the membership. And then as soon as we did that, we could get the committee convened and get them started on one of these assignments.
I'm a little bit confused about the timing. When do we have to have this done according to the legislative requirements?
I would think that there are different ways we can do this. I would think we need to have some recommendations available no later than the January board meeting. It might be a good idea to do a special call meeting before that and consider it.
Are you anticipating appointing this committee immediately?
Well, we could proceed in several ways. We have two different issues. I see this committee as a long-term committee, and so we can appoint that with all deliberate speed. The second issue is, what process of consultation do we go through with stakeholders between now and the time that the board makes a decision or takes a vote on this issue? And I would suggest that we've received an awful lot of input from all the variety of sectors, and I can tell you that the recommendations, we are now at the point where we're hearing the same things over and over again. So I think we're prepared to refine our recommendations based on the input that we've received, particularly the thoughtful responses we received from the organizations I mentioned in my remarks. We can develop more recommendations, and we would be willing to submit our final recommendations either at the January board meeting or a special called meeting, let's say in December. I think it would take us about somewhere between a month and 6 weeks to finish our recommendations to the board.
Well, what I'm looking for is, in terms of our discussion today, do we want to put these issues out on the table and talk about them, or do we want to postpone that discussion?
Well, that's up to you. We're prepared to talk about how we've reached these preliminary recommendations at this point.
Well, one of the things I've received a lot of questions about is which courses, why some courses aren't on here and others aren't. And, you sort of indicate that this board would look at that.
Yes.
yet we are going to need to vote on this in December or January. So I suppose we need to talk about it today.
What we did in identifying these courses, this is pretty much the conventional array of courses that universities all over the country count for admission. From state universities to selected private institutions. There is a consensus among universities about which courses should count. And this represents essentially a distillation of looking at course requirements, course prerequisites in universities around the country.
Perhaps an easier question would be, what courses are left off that right now are in place to help that count towards the GPA?
Well, that question is very difficult to answer because there's such a wide array of the way GPA is calculated around the state. There's some school districts that count physical education, sports. Other schools count all career and technical education courses, including courses such as welding or machining, so that others count primarily the academic courses. We have some schools in Texas that are very much aligned towards preparing students for admission to universities. For example, the YES Academies in Houston that focus primarily on those that are generally considered the core academic courses. Virtually every university in the country requires 3 years of social studies, 4 years of English, 3 years of math, and then an array of electives including fine arts, including courses like that there are within the range of social studies, economics, for example, and those are the courses that we've identified as being certain of being calculated in our recommendation. There is some flexibility. The college prep electives, 3.5 credits, and students have the flexibility of choosing any combination from these array of courses. Once again, that's pretty standard around the country.
So an economics course would come out of your college preparatory electives, or it would be a social study?
You could do it either place. You could do it either place. If you wanted to take economics in your high school, had a particular emphasis on economic courses or social studies, you might find that there were an array of social studies courses that you would want to take as electives. This is intended to emphasize the core academic disciplines that universities take a look at the same time providing students flexibility for those students that have special interests, for example, in the arts. The question of debate has come up. There's some high schools count debate as a fourth-year English course. In others, it's an elective, and so students would be able to use that as a course in either category.
Commissioner, and Lynn, maybe this is trying to address your question. We've got another hour, and I think we've got us all in one room.
Right.
I think it's a good time to have us all in one room so we can discuss it openly. And I guess what I would like to see us do, and this just personally is one, I think from where your original recommendation was, Commissioner, to where it is today, is trying to have listened to a lot of the comments that we have received over the last 4 to 6 weeks. Recognizing the need to give some weight to pre-AP, pre-IB. So I think this is trying to say we're listening to those comments. We think those have been good comments. I guess what I'd love to see us get on the table are what do we see still as those pending issues that are still being discussed. And let's talk about them today as a group, so we can maybe walk out of here with some consensus or at least next steps, and guidance for developing the final recommendation. And the ones I hear are the still issues about have we picked up the correct CTE courses? I've heard that on a continuous basis. I've heard the issue about the going down to the grading scale, and how far we go down. 3, it's assurance of quality and rigor and dual credit, since we're going to give them the same point credit as we do in AP. I think 4 is the GPA Oversight Committee. I think that is a great topic for us to discuss in terms of making sure that we're in agreement of what the scope should look like and selection of that committee. And when I say scope, to me, I see this as a committee that is, personally, is a committee that basically goes into effect subsequent to this board approving our recommendation for uniform GPA. To me, it's the stakeholders that help make sure that we get this implemented appropriately, and that we don't leave a CTE course out. I'm trying to think if there's another one I've heard. I've heard a lot of them.
The difference between the courses recommended to graduate and what we're counting.
Right. And I just thought of that as we're here for an hour. I think for this group, should we take each of those and just have a discussion of that and make sure we understand it as to at least the position right now, Commissioner, and your recommendation. So I don't know if I missed anything from all of us have been getting emails and phone calls. I'm just trying to pick up what I've heard are still maybe, I know there's a lot of issues that go all the way down, and you can really get way down in the weeds in this, as opposed to at the policy level. And
well, I think in regards to, I'm sorry.
I was second what you're saying. Fully half, maybe more realistically, 3/4 of the emails, letters, and calls I've received are still reacting to the original recommendation, and because they have not had the benefit of the thought process and the changes we've made. We've addressed probably 75-80% of the concerns I think that are out there. However, going forward, if it's the intent of this advisory committee to be formed after we adopt our recommended standard GPA calculation in our January meeting or sooner if we have a call meeting, I agree. I think we need to use this time to discuss and give guidance to what the committee ought to, what the process for selecting this committee member ought to be, because that's going to be the number one comfort factor for those people that are concerned about this process.
And Fred, I was just going to also emphasize that under pre-AP and pre-IB courses to be weighted, specifically says within 4 years this thing is going to be looked at again by this committee. I think to not undermine ourselves in what we're recommending and what we're portraying to our constituents, i.e. everybody in the state, we got to be real clear as to what this committee is all about and who's on it. And that's why I brought it up, Madam Chair, is because to me it is inherent through all the recommendations, and I did think that this was the time that we were going to discuss and maybe tweak and make adjustments or recommend adjustments. I don't know what the proper term is for that. Along the lines of the other issues we heard was this time of implementation. And I think we need to be real clear that when we say regardless of when the courses were taken, this satisfies all the questions about 7th and 8th graders and 6th graders. So, Commissioner, I applaud you for that. We just need to get the word out. But again, I focus on the GPA Advisory Committee, but because it is pivotal to everything that we are recommending.
I might suggest that we go through the first 3 points and just mention the issues that we all have heard, and then spend the bulk of the time talking about if that's all right with everybody. And Elaine, you just mentioned the timeline in the first piece of this. And does anybody have any timeline problems now that we have this, regardless of when it is taken, clause?
Be curious to see the input.
Yeah.
I agree with Elaine in that, I think the Commissioner's intent is to interpret that if they take a pre-AP course that measures up to the standard is taken before 9th grade, it will still be counted. And I think this makes it clear as succinctly as it can.
Well, this actually means something a little bit different. We're not going to monitor the rigor of pre-AP courses right now. We will accept those courses now as offered, and over the next 4 years, we want to implement certain standards of rigor that are uniform across the state. Right now, there's tremendous variance in the rigor of pre-AP courses, and that's demonstrable because we have a very low rate of passage on AP exams in Texas. And as I said, I cited that study and I sent it to members of the board. It's called Orange Drink or Orange Juice, and it points out that there is little evidence that these so-called advanced rigor courses actually lead to greater college success. And that clearly calls into question whether they're appropriately rigorous. So we're saying we will accept these courses for now, but over the next 4 years we will implement uniform standards of rigor.
And one thing that isn't clear to me is whether or not all AP and IB courses are included or just the ones that are listed.
Excuse me, say it again?
Are all AP and IB courses included or just the ones that are listed on the sheet? Because there's some districts that have AP courses that aren't.
No, they would be. We would, and that's something that I could refine. But we would include all pre-AP courses that lead directly to AP courses offered at the school.
All right. And what about AP? It's not pre-AP, but all AP.
We would count all AP courses.
All right. Okay. I think we might need to make that. I don't know if that was clear to everybody, but it wasn't clear to me because we've got the list, So, any other comments about point 2?
Could I ask Evie Hyatt to come up to the table because she's an expert on a lot of these issues.
While we're on point number 2, Evie or Commissioner, just because we've heard a lot of this, would y'all just make again comment on the CTE courses? And I know that part of that thought also, Commissioner, was that the GPA Advisory Committee also have scope defined as being able to continue to look at CTE courses if we haven't picked up a CPA course that changes the curriculum or something else.
Right.
So can you just give the committee an idea of the scope of the type of CTE courses, which would be picked up and those that would not? I mean,
I'll ask for somebody to go grab the manual and we can go. But I did mention some of the courses that are typically included in that manual. They include accounting courses, there are criminal justice courses, there are forestry courses, there are courses related to engineering, technology, and so forth. All of these are courses which lead to some university program. Once again, we're making a distinction between what is offered in community colleges and what is offered in universities, and there's a lot of confusion about this issue. The GPA calculation is largely irrelevant to community colleges because community colleges are open admissions. And universities want, when we met with the admissions officers from the universities, and I think we had about 30 admissions officers from the 35 universities that we have in Texas. And the consensus was count the courses that lead directly to a degree program at our institutions. Now there's some very exceptional issues that presumably this advisory committee would take a look at. What if you have one particular university in one particular part of Texas that has a program that's very specific to that region, but no other university in the state, and we do have circumstances like that, no other university in the state offers that degree program. And there is, in the community colleges and the high schools have aligned some of their program offerings with that university. Do we say that those courses are applicable to university admission in universities across the state, or that one? Those are some of the questions that we have to.
Commissioner, do you think we have addressed several of the concerns which have been expressed to us over the last 2 or 3 weeks by coming back and making this modification?
I think we have considered every recommendation that's been offered to us. We haven't accepted all of them, but we certainly have considered them, and we've made substantial adjustments. Let me read very quickly from the table of contents. Here's some of the courses: accounting, agriculture, architecture, business computer information, communications, criminal justice, engineering technology, environmental science, forestry, home economics, horticulture, kinesiology, real estate. Those are clearly career and technical courses that lead to specific careers, and those are included in the manual, and we will include those as a matter of course.
Okay, that's very helpful.
And
to follow on top of how varied our state is, I'm worried. I cannot myself think through this, but I know somebody on the staff is thinking through this. Unintended consequences. Haven't I heard in discussions of dual credit and AP that we have some high schools who, because of where they're located, or because of their funding situation, can't have AP classes. They have honors classes instead because they don't have a supply of the sort of teachers they need. Is this something we need to look at and take into account?
Yes, we have to look at honors classes. Honors classes vary more in their character and their quality than pre-AP courses do, because obviously pre-AP courses are related to specific fields. I think the last time I checked, there are 35 AP courses, or 35?
Between 32 and 35, it's going up and down a little bit.
But honors courses have even more variability, and it's very difficult to determine the quality. So I would assume that one of the things the advisory committee would do would take a look at honors courses and advise the coordinating board about whether those should be given extra weight.
And Dr. Phillips, remember that the laws are about to change so that every school district has to be offering a minimum of 12 credits of college level courses, which is according to TEA rules, either dual enrollment or advanced placement or IB. So that would be true across the board. And through things like service centers, education service centers, you can be getting AP courses, piped in through the internet, as well as through the virtual college.
In real time with this.
Yeah.
That's good.
I'd like to make another quick point. We've received, and all of you have as well, emails and phone calls that suggest that my recommendations would dumb down the curricula in Texas. What I'm trying to do is exactly the opposite. Instead of offering rigor to a handful of students or to the 20% of high school graduates that are college ready, what I would like to do is work with high schools to expand rigor to all students. So I don't want to dumb down. I don't want to dumb down courses. I want to raise everyone to the level of strong coursework that leads to post-secondary success.
Commissioner, I think that's well put, and I think, Madam Chair, that we want those who are concerned, the parents and the administrators and the principals, everyone who we've received letters and emails and phone calls from, to understand that we understand that much of what is driving this is the top 10% law's focus on class rank. That's not lost on any member of this board. and hopefully we've taken that into account. But we see, as the Commissioner just said, the next 4 years are going to be pivotal years in the relationship between public education and higher education, because if we're successful in integrating and implementing these college readiness standards, what the Commissioner is describing will occur. The rigor and quality of all high school coursework will rise to the level of what we now describe as pre-AP or pre-IB, and it will have a tremendous impact on college readiness, hopefully as soon as 4 years hence.
If we implement the college readiness standards statewide, that would essentially mean that all courses are pre-AP, which is a good thing.
And which is why we've, as a sidebar, we've asked our staff to prepare public awareness programs to be sure that parents are learning about this for their kids who are going to be ninth graders in 2013.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think we're going to have to do a lot more in public awareness, because just to put it all out on the table, the comment that I have heard the most is just the opposite of what you said, Commissioner. Well, everybody knows not everyone can take this kind of rigor, these kind of courses. And, you've been saying the opposite since you came to Texas, and we're going to have to keep talking about that.
The evidence, if you take a look, and nobody's suggesting it's easy, but there is evidence, we have evidence in Texas, the YES Academies, the FIT schools, the IDEA Academy in South Texas. There are examples all over this country of schools that are doing remarkable things with children from impoverished backgrounds. There's a book that came out. In fact, I think you're the one that called it to my attention. It's Being Done by Chenoweth,
right.
Which indicates what excellent schools that in poor neighborhoods have in common. And the first thing they have in common is high expectations for everyone.
And it's a sea change.
So, and it is a sea change. And I've taught in public school. I know how difficult some of the challenges are. But I look at this as an opportunity to work with K through 12 to expand rigor for all of our kids. And I would hope that public school officials and educators wouldn't think that I'm bashing public education when I cited some of the data that I did earlier today. I'm simply underscoring the challenge that we have before us. I know, for example, that in higher education we have to do a better job training teachers. The fact that we're not doing as well as we like is everybody's responsibility. And so I feel that this is the occasion for us to look at this issue of the uniform GPA, to work more closely together and expand opportunity, rigor, and achievement for a much greater number of Texas kids.
We all want that. Can we move on to item 3? Does anyone have any discussion about the weighting of the pre-AP and pre-IB courses?
This is the number one comment that we received from the original recommendation. I think indicates that the board and commissioner have taken that top concern into account and run with it.
We have this is an example of a recommendation that we received that we did not accept. We received some correspondence, some email suggesting that pre-AP courses be weighted the same as AP courses. And I find that hard to justify educationally. AP courses and dual credit courses are given a full extra grade point credit because they're college level courses. And if you can do college work in high school, that seems to me to be something worthy of extraordinary credit. But pre-AP courses are still high school courses. If they're more rigorous than regular courses, that's a good thing. And we've acknowledged that they are more rigorous by and large, and they should be given some kind of credit. However, to suggest that they should be given the same credit as an actual college level course simply doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So that is a recommendation that we received, that we thought about, and ultimately rejected. And I'm quite sure that between now and the time that the board takes a vote, that issue will emerge once again.
But as I recall, what we are recommending is pretty consistent with what the majority of the districts who testified to us last month are doing. So I think this is consistent with the majority of concerns and recommendations that we heard from.
I think your mic's on. I can't. Is it on?
Commissioner, would you also comment on, while we're talking about that, I know we're giving dual credit equal points as to AP and IB. Can you talk about, because I don't know if our board is aware of the rules that are in place about dual credit now, and how the Oversight Committee could even look at those rules to assure us that we do have that rigor in dual credit, the same rigor as AP and IB.
We obviously haven't done a very good job of informing all the interested parties about the rules governing dual credit courses. I had lunch with a superintendent yesterday who was unaware of the coordinating board rules on the offering of dual credit courses. Dual credit courses, and this was an earlier iteration of our recommendations. Dual credit courses, first of all, are available to students who have achieved the college readiness score. Secondly, dual credit courses are to be taught by faculty who are certified to teach at the community college level. And third, dual credit courses are supposed to have the same syllabi as the courses that are offered regularly with the same course title at the sponsoring community college. They're supposed to be exactly the same courses offered by the same kind of faculty that would teach the course to full-time or regular community college students. Apparently, and I say only apparently because I don't know that we have hard data, but apparently that isn't being honored. So the question is not whether you give a lower weight to dual credit courses. They're supposed to be college-level courses. The proper response, it seems to me, is to make sure that they're all of appropriate levels of rigor.
More oversight.
Yes. Hence the GPA Advisory Committee.
Okay.
And that is something that we would, Commissioner, your recommendation is we need to start doing that right away. That's not something you're recommending we wait 4 years.
No, we have to do it right away because we've heard expressions of concerns from universities about dual credit courses, and they're mandated by statute. And the last thing we want is to compromise or is to allow the integrity of these courses to be compromised. So we have to act very quickly to bring them up to acceptable levels of rigor and quality.
Shall we move on into discussing the advisory committee? And I have a question to kick us off. We had an initial advisory committee or not? We had. I would think maybe we should have someone at least from that initial advisory committee on this for some continuity. I don't remember about that. Did we?
There was an initial advisory committee, and there are members that have continued to serve throughout the year every time they were called.
Okay.
And they do represent school systems, so there would be the constituents that you're looking at.
How many people are on the committee, Judy?
Well, now it's expanded because we added all the associations, etc. So there's probably about 54 after all the year-long starting. And Natalie can probably tell us the exact number from the original one. 15 was the original one.
And now it's 54?
Well, because we expanded. We brought in superintendents from small systems. We brought in the university personnel. Then we went down to associations. Then we expanded further into the principalship ranks from the diversity of school systems.
And this was done in response to the Attorney General's opinion, when we recognized that this would have that our calculation would have broader ramifications than we had originally thought. and we knew we had to consult more broadly with the K-12 sector.
But of the original core, there's a core of 15 people.
So I would just suggest that we look at choosing one member from that group. More comments about this?
Well, here again, I'll follow up on what I said earlier. I would hope that we would look at, I know you mentioned 5, 5, and 5, Commissioner, and if that's the pleasure of the board, we ought at least float that balloon to make sure that they know what we're at least thinking about. And I would even challenge us to think about a 6-5-4 split, just to give, again, more confidence of what we're trying to do and going forward, and it just helps the debate a little bit better instead of speculation of what this could turn into or not. So that's what I would throw out there.
Oh, I agree with that. I think when we're going in and saying we are going to come in and establish certain standards of rigor in your school districts, that it would ease things some to have a weight from the K-12 sector, even if it's just a small one.
Another thought that occurs to me, I have less concern about the 5, 5, and 5 balance so long as the process of nominating potential stakeholders is inclusive enough that we get relatively broad input and have the ability to select the kind of stakeholders that
and I think we need both, Fred. I think we need both.
Yeah.
I think we need both. I think we need at least a demonstration of what we're thinking with the 6-5-4 type of split, but also a very rigorous process, an AP process for getting nominees and selecting them.
In terms of some indication about what we'll be asking them to look at, I guess some of that's obvious from our discussion today, but Commissioner, your statement you made, I think would be a powerful addition to this last point of the sort of scope and the breadth and the depth of things we'll be asking this committee to look at. And maybe we could find some way to append that to this item. Mr. Shepherd.
Madam Chair, just one other comment. What the legislature can give us, they can take us away too. So whatever our bright ideas are, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion about this coming up in the next session. So I don't want to put a damper on our discussion, but just keep that in the back of your mind.
Well, I think that's an underlying element of everything that we're talking about. Right?
All the more reason to get everything we can.
Are you suggesting we let the legislature pick the GPA advisory committee?
No, I think we need to make a stand at it.
No, but I agree with your point that it should be a very broad process in terms of how these folks even get to the nomination plate, and I agree with that. I frankly think there's some merit to the 5-5-5 because I think the message would be absolutely critical. We have to have the public education people at the table, no doubt, but equally as important would be to have the higher education and the workforce sectors there, because ultimately this is a group responsibility and effort, and I think that the 5-5-5 does send that message.
The thing that I liken it to is the vertical team. When the vertical team started off with, when higher ed was talking about what is required in intro-level courses, we were 60-40. Now that we're dependent on having those college readiness standards go through the system, it's at 60-40, but higher percent public ed, lower percent higher ed. So that's kind of the boilerplate here, or the metric, the first stab in terms of where my thinking is on this, is because a lot of this rigor and everything that, if you listen to the commissioner's comments, everything this GPA advisory committee is touching on every one of these bullets, really. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the stuff is going to be measured down the pipeline. And so that is kind of the 60-40 split, if you will, that is likened to what we're doing with vertical teams.
I think a bigger issue, too, is timing. When is this really going to be put in place? And when would you have this 15-member team in place?
I think what we talked about earlier, Bob, and what I heard was, that this would be part of the recommendation we adopt in December, January. And then I guess that following that, subsequent to that, we would trigger this process in as timely a fashion as possible to get that committee in place.
Right, I guess that's what I'm saying. From the time it's triggered to the time they're a working committee, what are we really looking at? Because I think that is what's going to put the vetting process into place, how quickly we can make these things happen, or we're dealing with an unknown time constraint where the more time we have, the more time we'll take.
Well, I think, Bob, it's got to happen before May of 2009.
Oh, it's got to happen well before.
Way before that, because, we start with the ninth grade class in May of 2009, and so we're looking at putting this officially before the board in January of 2009. So in my mind, we would have to nominate that group very quickly to get them, engaged in the implementation process as the Uniform GPA rolls out. So I would say very quickly after the board officially approves it. So I think that's why we've got to vet out, that whole process, prior to that January meeting, and have that defined as part of our approval process, for our recommendation to it.
Any other comments?
If we had a consensus on how we go about this, it would be tempting to start. It would be nice if the nomination process could actually go forward, so that in January we had a slate of nominees. If I could snap my fingers and make things happen the way I wish they would, that would be probably ideal timing. But we're, obviously just in the discussion we're having amongst ourselves as board members, we're haven't hit on the magic bullet yet for how to select these. We haven't even talked about the fact that the workforce members are the wild card. I hate to sound cynical, but somebody from the outside looking for things to criticize could say, well, you use those workforce members to stack it one way or the other.
That's going to be the case with any staff board.
No, that'll be that claim will be made by whomever doesn't like the outcomes of the recommendations of the advisory committee.
And in a sense, that's almost leads me back to saying, well, what I said before, the 5, 5, and 5 makeup doesn't bother me at all, as long as I and my fellow board members, and more importantly, the public constituency feels confidence in the nomination and selection process.
I think one of the things that the commissioner has said time and time again is wanting to make sure that this message is sent that we want to work with public ed, and that we embrace this is a dual challenge between the higher education community and the public education sector. What better way to show that we are serious than by having a more aggressive representation of the public school system on such an important committee that affects them. And yes, affects us, and yes, affects us as employers as well. But to have it move forward in a way that shows we are truly integrated.
Well, I might be able to mediate here and suggest that we appoint somebody who's a hybrid, like, for example, our fellow member, Laurie Bricker, who's has a foot in both camps. And there are many people like that who have the kind of experience to give confidence to K-12, but also represent another sector.
We're not going to succeed without them. We just aren't. The college readiness standards, there's only so much we can do to make sure that those get implemented and embraced at pre-K through. And I think this is a message that we are sending.
Well, I think there was I don't know about the rest of you, but I thought it was a genius to have that sort of weighting and the switched weighting in the college
vertical
readiness
team.
thing.
And I don't see why that is not something that we can look towards as a successful method.
What do you think?
Oh, thanks.
You're most welcome.
Well, I think that the rationale for
Abby, I'm real close to you now.
There's no pressure here, you understand. I think the rationale for having the 6-4 split was that colleges and universities wanted to be able to say, this is what is expected at college. When we switch back, or to be successful in post-secondary options, when we switch to the 6-4 public ed, it was primarily because what the assignments were focused almost strictly on public education. Are the texts going to get us to college readiness?
We're talking about.
I really do think, with due respect, that this is an issue that really affects both sides. It's important. All three. Yes, I'm sorry. That we really. I think it's time for us to perhaps look at a true merging where we are equal partners. So I guess I do like the 5-5-5, but I'm not an expert on this. So.
And you're also higher education.
I am higher education with a strong background in public education. In fact, that's my real background.
You know, another stab is how the 5 workforce members are selected. And those 5 could, you know, if we really need to balance this, and this is only going to be important one time, it'll be with the initial advisory committee, because I'm of a mind that regardless of 5-5-5 or 6-5-4 or 1-14, that they'll do, you know, these will be people committed to doing the right job and understanding their scope and understanding that these first 3 bullet points are really set, but that because curriculum and rigor are a moving, changing target, therefore we need this advisory committee. If it's 5-5-5, you know, why not let the higher ed side and the public ed side have a say in nominating 2 apiece from the workforce, and then those 4 select a 5th. You know, there's always a way to do it, is my point, and see that there's fair balance. I appreciate the comments about the 60-40 to 40-60 split on the college readiness standards, because I think whoever initially recommended that was an inspired way to attack the process. I don't know that this is the same kettle of fish. I don't know whether we'll get to a formula here, but I do think that the scope of responsibility of the advisory committee is the real key. But the initial selection of this advisory committee will be the most closely watched process to kick it off.
Well, are the members satisfied with the scope of the committee as it's expressed in this 4th point here?
So long as it's clear that it's touching on these other points. In 4 years, they're going to do a review of the weighting of pre-A courses. So it's
Madam Chair?
Sure.
I really do think we're probably all the way down in the weeds now.
Yeah, I think we are. We're down there.
And a couple of comments. And one, when we get this sorted out, we can give the charge of the commissioner or the board can give the charge to the committee. And I don't think we'll solve all that today. I think we certainly have time to work on it. And then the other thing is, whether or not the whole board wants to be involved in this process, or I think a better way to do it is, let the committee chairs kind of sort this out and bring it forward. I mean, surely we can all ultimately agree on, the committee the number of people. But we spent an awful lot of time on that this morning. I think it's time to move on.
I think so. And I don't know exactly, since we changed our original plan, what we're going to do with this. This just concludes the discussion.
Yeah, this is only a discussion point for today, and I guess what I'd suggest is...
I thought it was going to be posted.
Well, the original... do we need... We'll ask our council since it was originally.
The document that was handed out today is not intended for posting. It was intended as a framework for rules to be drafted, which obviously contain substantial modifications to the rules that were published a month and a half ago. And as a result, those rules, these new rules that I'm referencing right now, they have not yet been drafted. And once those are drafted, although they'll be based or modeled upon the document you received, that is the document. Those rules are what will be published in the Texas Register. That will then open up, in turn, a new 30-day comment period, because we will have to withdraw the currently existing rules that are out in the public domain.
So do we need a motion to table?
Yeah. I would suggest a motion to postpone consideration of the Commissioner's recommendation on uniform GPA until either the January board meeting or an earlier specially called board meeting.
So moved. Do I have a motion? So moved. Second?
Second.
Motion made by Elaine, seconded by Whit. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. That concludes discussion of this item. I don't know if you have another item.
We have one more item on the agenda, and that is agenda item 4 in our package, and that is consideration of adopting on an emergency basis the Commissioner's recommendations relating to new sections 22.196 and 22.202 of board rules. And this is concerning the provisions for scholarships for students graduating in the top 10% of their high school class. The reason that this is coming under strategic planning is that this was originally part of the rider, the General Appropriations Act passed by the 80th Texas Legislature, which developed the coordinating board to develop a methodology for distributing $100 million in incentive funds for the general academic institutions. That rider also authorized that a portion of the funds be used for scholarships for students who graduate in the top 10%. And we have a recommendation on the table today, and Lois is going to walk us through that.
I'm just going to briefly tell you about the rules for the top 10% scholarship. We work with the governor's office, and this will be our first true need plus merit program, because this does have a financial need component to it. For a student to be eligible, they're going to have to be in the top 10% of their high school graduating class as of their 7th semester in high school, or whichever semester the institution of higher education uses to admit the student. They're going to be eligible for a $2,000 scholarship as long as, when you take the total cost of attendance, subtract from that the family's expected family contribution and the Pell Grant, as long as there's need there, the student is eligible for $2,000. If there are funds appropriated, this will be a 4-year renewable scholarship. To be eligible for a renewal, a student has to complete 30 semester credit hours in the previous year with a 3.25 GPA and a 75% completion rate. For students who major in high need fields, There is an extra bonus that a student can receive, which is a $2,000 bonus on top of the original $2,000 scholarship. And for those students, they're eligible in their junior and senior year, and their GPA only has to be 3.0. We do have hardship provisions in the rules to allow for students who don't meet the GPA requirements or the number of hour requirements. So that's the top 10% scholarship in a nutshell.
Any questions? And I guess it's important to note that we only have funds for 1 year.
1 year.
Basically.
And the other issue is, this is for students graduating this May, and the funds all have to be spent and encumbered by August 31st of 2009. So we're working with high school counselors. We got a group of counselors together to help us go through the rules. This is a product of that, and they are helping us get the word out so we can get those students identified and get them awarded.
But even though it's 1 year, we're drafting the rules to provide for if additional money is appropriated for insurance funding in the future.
Right.
Questions? Not, could I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Ms. Phillips, second. Second by Mr. Wingo. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed by the same sign. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn and go to lunch. So moved.
Third, fourth.